Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto Audio Fanfics and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is, what if Naruto discovered love with Hinata, and found the missing pieces of his heart through Ino, Sakura, Karen, Yugito, Tamari, Tenten, and Tayuya, Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Naruto whistled to himself as he spiked up his hair then put on his jacket. This was a new one that he had bought a few days ago since he had outgrown his old orange one. This one was all black at the shoulders and mid-chest and back, the rest of it was orange and his matching pants had a black stripe down the inside and outside of the legs. For some odd reason he felt like the outfit was missing something and he went to the closet and looked inside and found a black belt with metal studs decorating it. He had forgotten that he bought this some time ago. As he took it down from the closet he felt the studs and turned it over in his hands a few times. With a strange smile he pulled the belt through the loops then fastened it. Looking in the mirror he had to admit, he looked good. He hoped Hinata would think so too. No worries pup. I am sure she will treat you like a fresh kill. Naruto grinned then frowned right afterwards as he thought about that. Thanks, I think. Naruto jumped and ran down the stairs when he heard the doorbell. Stopping 3 steps from the front door he composed himself then opened it. Hey Naruto. We didn't know you were back in town until today when Kakashi told us he saw you walking out of the ramen stand with Hinata. How you been dirtbag? Hiba walked past Naruto and into his house followed by Shino who bowed slightly to Naruto at the front door. Naruto shrugged off the insult. Hiba always had something smart ass to say, and sometimes went a little too far, but on a level it made Naruto feel uneasy today. Everything is cool. I just got back a little over 3 weeks ago. Where have you guys been? I've been by the training grounds a few times since I got back and I haven't seen any of the old gang there. Hiba flopped down in one of Naruto's bean bags then shrugged. Missions galore. The new Hokage has made a lot of changes and she has kept us busy. Nice digs you got here, better than that dump you used to live in. Naruto frowned at Kiba's tone. It started to annoy him, but he was about to go on a date with the most beautiful woman in the world so nothing was going to disturb his groove. Naruto shrugged as he let out the breath he was holding. It was home. Now this is home. I found myself able to afford my own place finally so I figured what the hell. It is cozy and has the features I wanted. That is all that matters to me. Shino looked between Naruto and Kiba, a frown starting to develop on his face. His hive started to become agitated in conjunction with the feelings he was starting to have. Kiba seemed to be deliberately goading Naruto. Shino hoped he was wrong, but he had seen Kiba do this on several occasions to enemies on missions. He hoped he was wrong, but if he wasn't. Kiba grinned as he pushed the hood back from his coat. I'm sure. So when you gonna start being a ninja again? Or are you going to stick around this time? I'll have to be honest Baka, I always knew you were a true blonde, but I never thought you were a coward too. Well I take that back. Naruto's blood pressure had started to spike, but he paused as Kiba did. Kiba looked at him, the grin still plastered across his smug face. I knew you were a coward from our match at the Chunin exams, I had just forgotten how much of one you were. Naruto bared his teeth as his anger spiked. He turned fully to face Kiba even as Fana tried to get him to stay calm. This time though, Naruto wasn't having any of it. Look Kiba, I don't know what crawled up your butt, but I do know that whatever it is you better keep it to yourself or stay the hell away from me. Calm down pup, do not let him stir your hackles. Fana said this as he unsheathed his claws and bared his fangs. Obviously he wasn't pleased either. Kiba jumped to his feet, but Shino stepped in between the two, an ominous buzzing sound coming from within his cloak. I did not come here to fight with you Naruto but it appears Kiba had ulterior motives. I do not wish any problems, so I will say welcome back, and take my leave of you. Kiba I suggest you do the same. Kiba opened his mouth to say something but Shino tilted his head down and looked at him over his sunglasses and Kiba paled slightly. Shino was always kind of creepy what with bugs living inside of him, but for the most part he was a pretty nice guy to his friends and companions. Naruto had heard though that if you pissed him off, you regretted it for a long time. Yeah, I need to go pick up Akamaru from his vet visit anyway. Naruto nodded to Shino but opened the door just as Hinata was about to knock on it. Shino stepped past her and smiled. Hello Hinata. It is good to see you again. Shino then turned and walked up the path to the fence opening and stopped. Kiba. Kiba stood there for a moment staring at Hinata, which irritated Naruto more than the earlier conversation. So Naruto did the only thing he could think of at the moment. He stepped into Kiba's line of sight and leaned down and kissed Hinata on the lips. Fana laughed as he sheathed his claws and settled down again. Smart move pup. Worthy of a kitsune. Naruto chuckled as he gave Hinata's side a little squeeze. Not at all Fana. I'm just doing as you would do, marking my territory. Hinata accepted the kiss and smiled before waving to Shino and stepping into the house past Kiba. Hello Kiba. How is Akamaru? Kiba still stood there dumbfounded as she walked past him. Naruto stepped inside and held the door. Shino is waiting for you Kiba, time to go. Kiba snapped his head around to Naruto then growled as he stomped out the door. This isn't over. Naruto smiled, but it was the smile of the fox. Don't make me finish it Kiba. Kiba frowned then waved his hand once in dismissal and stomped away from the house and Shino gave a last wave as Naruto shut the door. Hinata came over and rested a hand on his shoulder. What is wrong Naruto-kun? Did Kiba say or do something? Naruto nodded then shrugged as he let the rest of his anger go with a sigh. Yeah, but it was nothing new. I should be used to it by now but, it still sucks sometimes. Hinata placed her other hand on his other shoulder then leaned her head into the hollow of his back. Her voice came to him barely above a whisper, and shocked him a little. I am sorry, it is my fault. Naruto frowned then turned and hugged her. No, Kiba is still a jerk from when we were in school, that's all. Hinata shook her head and looked up at him. No Naruto-kun. Kiba is upset because I left the team. But not just because I left the team, but because I left the team for you. Naruto blinked as he looked into her eyes, disbelief warred with concern as he looked at her. Why? You left your team. For me. I thought you left so you could learn medical jutsu. Hinata nodded as she turned and wiped her eyes. I did, but Shino and Kiba asked me to come back when my training was done, and I told them I couldn't. Hinata turned to him and anguish was clearly written on her face. I knew that one day you would come back, and if I was on the team with Shino and Kiba still the chance for us being teammates was slim at best. So I took a risk and left them and devoted myself to training again, and waiting for you. Naruto backed up until he was pressed against the wall. No one had ever been that dedicated to him before. On one level it was a little scary, she focused her entire life to being with him. A stalker in the making it would seem. On the other hand it was one of the most beautiful things he could think of because again, she devoted herself to being with him. No one had ever treated him so well or sacrificed so much for him before. Another knot inside of him loosened and fell away, and as it did he felt more at ease than he ever had before. I wonder what she would have done if I didn't want to be with her or I didn't return. After his initial shock he smiled at her then chuckled. Well that explains why Kiba is pissed at me. Shino is taking it good though. Hinata went and sat on the couch and looked at her hands as she began to wring them in worry. Naruto watched her and wondered why she was still agitated. Well Shino understood. He has always been, if that is what you must do then you have my blessing, kind of guy. Kiba on the other hand had another reason to hate you and I guess he hasn't gotten over it. Naruto came over and sat next to Hinata on the couch. Another reason. But I haven't even been around to piss him off. Is he still butthurt about me beating him in the exams? Geez talk about holding a grudge. Hinata frowned as she wrung her hands together harder, causing the coloration to change. I do think he is still upset about that but not as upset as he is about this. Kiba came to me after I resigned from their team and he told me that he liked me. Naruto blinked as he thought about it then nodded. I see. So he blames me for you and him not being together. Hinata nodded, and Naruto felt the instinct to rush over and hold her against him, but he could see she still wasn't done. I tried to be nice about it. Kiba was nothing more than a friend to me, I never liked him that way. Even if I did have feelings like that he killed them the same day when he told me. I worried over his words and he came over and hugged me. I took it as a friendly hug at first, but then he grabbed my denbu. Naruto's eyes widened as Hinata blushed deeply and looked down again. Naruto walked over and sat next to her and rested his hand on hers to help calm her. What happened Hinata-chan? Hinata took a deep breath and let it out slowly before looking up at Naruto, a look of deep pain on her face. I slapped him. It must have been harder than I thought because he spun around and crashed into the garbage cans and spilled trash everywhere. Then I got mad and screamed at him. I don't remember what I said, but the look on his face was odd. Like he couldn't believe that I would do such a thing to him, like he was perfectly within his rights. After that day, I never really talked to Kiba again, and knew as long as he was there I couldn't be on their team ever again. Hinata didn't say anything else for a while, he just held her hands and offered her all the comfort he could. Hinata looked at him again and forced a smile. Well, that was the main thing that turned me away from Kiba, but to be honest, he grossed me out. Akamaru usually smells better than he does. Naruto started laughing, lightly at first. He remembered a few days in the academy when Kiba didn't smell as the commercial says, not so fresh. He laughed harder as he imagined Kiba approaching his mother and telling her that, and then he laughed so hard he almost fell off the couch. Hinata frowned deeply and smacked his arm. Stop it, Naruto-kun, it isn't funny. After a few minutes Naruto was reduced to giggles as Hinata glared at him and he regained his composure, but as she was about to talk he went into a new fit of hysterics. Hinata smacked his shoulder harder. Naruto, I'm serious, stop laughing. Naruto tried hard but he imagined Akamaru in the house washing himself in a bathtub with soap and sweet-smelling colognes, and Kiba outside rolling around in filth. It was too much for him. Fana sniffed at him, seeming a little peeved. There is nothing wrong with rolling around in the peat once in a while, it is good for the coat. This should have never been said because this time Naruto did fall off the couch and could not move as he held his belly in his hands, braying uncontrollably as he couldn't get the images out of his head. Hinata tried her best to be angry at him but his laughter became infectious and she giggled a few times as she watched him lying there. Despite the way she felt about the previous encounter with Kiba, Naruto's laughter made her feel better about everything, he could always make her feel better. After a few seconds she grinned down at him, then jumped on top of him and began tickling him. Oh, stop, no. Naruto, already overwhelmed by laughter, could not help himself as she tickled him, so he just did his best to deflect her hands until she lay down on top of him and sighed. Oh Naruto-kun, what am I going to do with you? Naruto's arms came up and encircled her waist and held her against him as he kissed her. When he looked at her again he just smiled and shrugged. Love me. It was meant as a joke. One of those cliché things you hear on television or in a movie. Hinata's eyes got moist as she traced his lips with a finger. Silly fox, I already do. He smiled, but did not think she was serious, even though her eyes held more emotion at this moment than he had ever remembered seeing before. Fana chose that moment to huff loudly, but Naruto ignored him. As they lay there on the floor, he started running his fingers over her back and he stopped as he got to her mid-back and shoulder. He frowned, then pressed a little firmer as he ran his fingers over her back again. Wait, she's not wearing a bra. Naruto's mind went into overdrive as he started to think about that, and then of course, hormones took over and he blushed as he tried to desperately think of something else. Hinata closed her eyes and moaned slightly and rocked against him, making him sigh also. His eyes locked with hers and his hands went to her hips against his will, and guided her movement downward, more against him. Hinata rocked down with Naruto's guidance and her mouth opened in a silent, oh, as a very sensitive part of her made contact, and her eyes glossed over and closed slightly, just before her eyes snapped open and got big. While the sensation felt incredible, she was always taught that, nice girls do not do those sorts of things, and she was suddenly scrambling to get off of him. Hinata stumbled and almost fell as she put the coffee table between herself and Naruto, a fire now burning low in her belly that she desperately needed to put out before she boiled over as she so often had in the past in response to Naruto. Naruto scrambled up at the same time and stayed on the other side of the coffee table as he tried to not look at her. I'm sorry, Hinata-chan. I didn't mean to. I don't know why, I couldn't stop. And he made the mistake of glancing at her and saw her in the dress she picked out for the evening for the first time. It was light purple with green vine-like designs printed on it in random places. The problem was this dress was tight in all the right places, or in this case in all the wrong places. Naruto stood with his hands covering his crotch and he tried hard not to stare at her, but he couldn't help himself. His pants had become painfully tight, and it didn't matter anymore what he tried to think of, all he could see was his Hinata. She was beautiful, and he wanted nothing more than to touch her right now, but that wasn't the real problem. You see, in Hinata's mad scramble to avoid what was happening, her dress had come up just high enough to show a little more than she would have wanted. The light in the room was bright enough so that Naruto could see hair and a slight hint of the treasure beyond, and it made him hungry in a way he had never hungered before. Fana perked up slightly as his nostrils flared the aroma of that familiar musk and her jasmine perfume, mixed, providing him an erotic sense of mystery. But he knew he shouldn't be able to see her like this, so he forced his gaze away and took a shuddering breath. Hinata, your dress, I can see your hoo-ha. Hinata looked down at herself and screeched while doing her best to manhandle her dress hem down to its normal height. After she got it down, she turned to the wall and Naruto could see her shoulders shaking. Immediately he felt horrible because he knew that this was all his fault. So since he knew it was his fault, he had to make it right. Naruto walked over and laid a hand on her shoulder. Hinata, She turned and looked at him, and he silently closed his eyes as he waited for the slap to fall. He deserved it. He was no better than Kiba at this point. He wanted to apologize, but he was sure she would hate him now. Well, at least someone did care about me, even if it was for a short while. And then she started laughing. Naruto opened his eyes and looked at her, and tears were running down her face, but she was laughing, and it was a full-on belly laugh that made her put her hand on his chest to support herself lest she fall. It took a few minutes, but eventually she calmed enough to speak again. Oh, that was so embarrassing. Naruto chuckled lightly, then shook his head. I thought you would be mad, that you would hate me. Hinata got a mischievous look in her eye and blushed lightly as she reached down and lifted the hem of her dress until her secret treasure was revealed to him. The hair was neatly trimmed, and appeared to be brushed in one direction, making it look very well groomed. Would I do this if I hated you, Naruto-kun? He flushed deep red and his hands went straight to his crotch, trying to cover his shame, to no avail. Hinata. She smiled before pulling her dress down again, blush still in place, but she didn't look upset or hurt in any way. Well, I have seen yours, so it is only fair. And no, Naruto-kun, I do not hate you. What you did was instinctual. It felt good, so your subconscious acted on it. What Kiba did was on purpose. I know there is much more innocence in you than there ever will be in Kiba, and that makes me love you more. Finally, after a long, uncomfortable silence which made her begin to feel self-conscious, he blurted out, Hinata-chan, you're beautiful. Hinata blushed deeply, then smiled at him, taking a step closer to her man. Surprising him, Hinata grasped his hands gently and put them at his side. Do not hide it. I told you it is nothing to be ashamed of. I know it is not your fault. It just surprised me again. It seems to be popping up more and more. She thought about what she said and giggled again, but Naruto just looked frustrated and flustered. Naruto tried to pull his hands away from hers, but she clung to him tenaciously. But, it embarrasses you, and it embarrasses me. Hinata leaned forward and kissed him on the lips, then looked at him and he could see the honesty in her face. Yes, it does, but I have to get used to it or it will always embarrass me. I do not want that, and I do not want you to be embarrassed by it either. It is something natural between a man and woman, fiancés, boyfriend and girlfriend, and man and wife. Eventually, I hope that neither of us will be embarrassed by something so natural. She looked thoughtful for a minute, then looked at him shyly. Perhaps I will share one of the things that shamed me for a long time too, so you will not be so self-conscious. Naruto looked at her and wanted to cry. Hinata-chan, but there was nothing else that needed to be said. He put his hands at his sides, then smiled sheepishly. Well, if you keep dressing like that, then it will happen around you a lot. Hinata gasped, then smacked him on the shoulder, and he laughed before taking her in his arms and kissing her. Shall we go? I remember something about dinner and a movie. Hinata laughed, then took his arm in hers. I think we should. Hinata and Naruto ate quietly as a harp played in the background. Occasionally it would be accompanied by a piano, and it blended nicely, making the atmosphere romantic and light. Naruto had never been in a restaurant this nice before. In truth, they wouldn't let him in if he had not walked in with Hinata on his arm. The greeter immediately recognized her, and took no notice of Naruto, which was fine with him this time around because he felt uncomfortable and out of place as he walked with his arm laced with Hinata's. When they were shown their table, Naruto looked around and saw people glancing at him and Hinata, and the majority of looks were confusion. I guess they don't understand why she is with me. Naruto thought to himself. He wondered for the thousandth time why they just didn't see him for the good things he did, but as the thought started, he killed. He knew better than anyone that no matter what he did, nothing and no one would see him differently. With a blink, he looked at Hinata and smiled. Well, almost no one. Naruto kept stealing glances, and despite what she had said earlier, he couldn't relax because his problem refused to go away. For some reason, it was more of a problem than usual, and nothing he thought about would slow it down. All he could imagine in his mind was the sight of Hinata-chan's dress lifted above her hips, and the way it seemed to call to him, to invite him. He didn't understand it. Even when he checked out one of Jiraiya's books, just out of curiosity. He didn't feel this way, but whenever he looked at or thought about Hinata-chan, Rock of Gibraltar. It is the mating drive pup. All males go through it in their lives. Naruto frowned as he pushed his ribs around his plate with a fork. Yeah, but why does it have to happen to me now? Fana chuckled as he opened his eyes and looked at Naruto, then shook his head. You are what they call a late bloomer. You should have already gone through this stage of it a few years ago. Unfortunately, since it is hitting you now, it will be much stronger than normal. Naruto frowned deeper as he considered the kitsune's words. You mean as gets worse? Buddha, why me? Opening parenthesis. Now I know you're thinking, hey, Naruto is Japanese, and Buddha was an entity from Chinese mythology. Not a mistake, I assure you. Buddha was also known as a traveler. He or she, depending on your orientation, would go from place to place offering wisdom and knowledge for all those who needed or sought it. Who is to say he didn't travel to Japan, or the elemental realms? Just a little tidbit for you, the reader, smiley face. The fox frowned at this, then rolled its front shoulders in what could have been a shrug. It does not always have to be about you and your problems, pup. All human males go through it, and human females go through something similar. Consider it a new challenge. Overcome it, or it will overcome you. Naruto grumbled to himself. He suddenly didn't feel very hungry. I don't know if I can handle it getting worse. Fana was still frowning, but his words were not unkind as he stared at his jailer. Then mate with her. As soon as you do, the urge will lessen greatly, and then your relationship can continue with less distractions. Naruto looked pained as he stared at Fana. While he felt the urge, he felt the need. He was sure it would lessen him in Hinata's eyes, and he didn't want that at all. I can't. Not until we are ready. Fana stared at him a few moments, then shrugged as he lay his head back on his paws again. Humans, so complicated. A demon mates for life. The one I couple with becomes my mate, plain and simple. Humans want to make it a big production, with empty promises and lies, and if that weren't enough, they grow bored with each other, and instead of trying to find a way to fix it, they have meaningless sex with strangers, but only feel more empty and broken afterwards. It is a good thing I am not human, just trapped inside of one, and that is bad enough. Before Naruto could respond, her dulcet voice called to him, and he turned outward again. Don't you like your food, Naruto-kun? He looked up and smiled a bit sheepishly. Oh yeah, I was just thinking is all. Hinata looked at him, then nodded. Well, I hope I am not the one that slipped those in your mouth. Naruto looked at her, then blinked. Question mark. I didn't eat any. Naruto looked at his plate and around the table but could not find any trace of. As he looked questioning at Hinata, she was covering her mouth and her shoulders were shaking slightly. Oh, Naruto-kun. He blinked, feeling denser than usual. What? Hinata took a deep breath and tried to explain between fits of giggles. You looked so sad, it was like you bit into an especially sour. That is why I told you that. Naruto blinked as he thought about it, then smiled. Oh, I see. Yeah, I guess I did look a bit sour. Hinata scooted around the table to sit next to him and placed a hand on his. What is wrong, Naruto-kun? I do not like when you are unhappy. Naruto shrugged as he looked into her eyes, trying to not say something that might hurt her. I am worried that my problem might get worse in time, Hinata. It seems to come alive more and more often than it used to. Hinata nodded and blushed slightly. I know, but it is normal, Naruto-kun. Try not to worry about it so much. I am not mad at you and I do not hate you for it. Besides, I know some of the blame lies with me. But I will always love you. Naruto smiled, but he still had a sour look. Hinata frowned as she looked at him. What else? I can see that isn't everything. Naruto frowned, then leaned forward and whispered to her. Hinata-chan, I'm not a pervert. Hinata smiled, then leaned over and hugged him. With a little kiss on his neck, she whispered in his ear. Oh Naruto-kun, I know you aren't. That is why I am not afraid or worried by it. If you were a pervert, I wouldn't get near you while that was awake. Hinata looked down, then blushed deeply and mumbled to herself. And if you were a pervert, if you were only mine, I wouldn't mind. Naruto laughed, but a huge weight lifted from his heart and he almost collapsed against her. She knows I'm not a pervert. Yes. Hinata felt him relax and she smiled as she leaned back and cupped his cheek in her right hand. She wanted to tell him her secret. She needed to tell him her secret, her shame. No, I can't. He won't understand. Better to suffer in silence than to lose Naruto-kun. She smiled at him, then squeezed his cheek slightly. Feel better? Naruto nodded and smiled at her as he turned his head slightly and kissed her hand. Much. I was worried you might think I am like Jiraiya. Hinata laughed as she pulled her plate and glass over to where she was sitting. Nope. I know better than to think of you like that. I trust you, Naruto-kun. I know you would never do anything to intentionally hurt me. Naruto grinned as he picked up a rib and began eating finally. Not even a little. Oh. After a while, Naruto paid the check and they made their way to the movie theater, hand in hand, and people watched them walk together and smiled at the couple. Naruto was fine, but Hinata felt a little self-conscious with so many people glancing their way. Maybe I shouldn't have worn this dress, Naruto-kun, too many people are looking. Naruto smiled and raised his voice. That is because they can see how beautiful you are. Who wouldn't stop and look at the sweetest woman in the world that I was lucky enough to get to love me? Other couple laughed or giggled at his outburst. None seemed to disagree with him. Hinata blushed deeply, then leaned closer to him and kissed his cheek. You are so sweet. And nothing needed to be said. When they got to the theater, they had a choice between 3 movies. One neither of them looked too thrilled with because it was a horror movie. While Naruto didn't mind blood, he didn't like being scared. Hinata wasn't crazy about blood, but she liked being scared even less. The second was a documentary about penguins narrated by some famous actor. They both shook their heads at that and finally settled to see the last one. This was an action romance about a man who came back from the future to save a woman from a killer robot, or something. Naruto thought the robot looked cool and it promised to have some serious violence. Hinata smiled because the man and woman looked like a cute couple, so Naruto paid for the tickets and they went in. During the movie, Hinata sat enwrapped while the violence was going on, surprised she was actually enjoying all the people being killed. Naruto, of course, only took his eyes off the screen to look at Hinata and wince about how tight his pants would become. What he wouldn't do to have a pair of Guy-sensei's comfortable stretch pants now. When the romantic part came up, Naruto focused on the way the man and woman were kissing and remembered what Fana had told him earlier about kissing a woman. It seemed that these two used their tongues quite vigorously, and seemed to enjoy it very much. He turned to whisper something to Hinata and he noticed her face was flushed and she was gripping the armrest of her seat and panting lightly, her lips slightly parted. Naruto was going to say something to her, but Fana stopped him. I wouldn't, pup. You will embarrass her really badly if you do. Naruto blinked as he thought back at Fana. But, why? She accepts that you feel desire and mating urges. She will probably be worried that you will not accept these same desires and urges in her. Naruto frowned as he considered this. But that's crazy. Why would it be okay for me and not for her? Fana shrugged as he laid his head on his paws. It is a trait in human females. In the human culture, I have observed that a woman displaying urges to want to mate for procreation or recreation is frowned upon. Men do not want their women to exhibit these feelings. It does not always make sense, but it is consistent. This is one of the reasons she gets embarrassed. When you have an erection, she becomes excited as well. It is a natural reaction for her as well, but she was raised to resist it, to not let these feelings show. It is madness. Female Myobu are encouraged to seek out the strongest, most fertile male to mate and bond with. Naruto didn't understand all of that. He thought Fana was being a bit highbrow with him, but he shrugged it off this time. Bond with? You mean to marry? Fana nodded slightly with a smile as if remembering something pleasant. In a sense, yes. Myobu are demons, but we still choose mates and sire offspring. Unlike humans, we mate for life. My mate was the most vibrant and strongest of females, and we raised many kits before I was trapped in you. There are times I miss her, if I understand the emotion properly. Naruto blinked as he absorbed this. The Kyuubi mated for life. Wow. That sounded cool actually. Always knowing that someone would always love you and always be there when you needed them. Wait. Did he just say he missed his mate? Hey Fana. But the fox had turned his head away, and did not respond. Naruto tried to be casual as he went back to watching the movie, but felt a little better after Hinata's breathing returned to normal and her skin returned to its normal color. He thought he would try and talk to her about it later to see if maybe he can better understand or let her understand that he didn't mind, that it would not hurt or anger him if she displayed urges and desires. It just didn't seem right to him that she was expected to understand his needs but she wasn't supposed to have any. How stupid was that? Yeah, I'll talk to her later. Fana's baleful warning came back to Naruto, but he decided to completely ignore it. Hell, the dumb fox can't be right about everything. Oh. After the movie, Hinata was grinning as they walked arm in arm down the street. That was a great movie, Naruto-kun. I am glad we went to see it. Naruto nodded his agreement as he rubbed her arm. Yeah, it had awesome special effects, and I think that it was that actor's best role ever. He should probably get an award or something. I really thought he was a robot from the future. Hinata laughed as she nodded. Yes, he was great in that. She made a serious face and mimicked the actor's lines. I will be back. Naruto laughed. Hey, that was really good. Naruto made his face serious and gave it a try. Phase plasma rifle in a 40-watt range. Hinata grinned at Naruto and wrapped her arms under her breasts as she shivered. Ooh, that gave me goosebumps. Naruto leaned over and hugged her and noticed her were hard. Quickly he looked up and away, but the damage had already been done. Naruto had to stop for a second and stretch his legs slightly, then he took Hinata's arm and they continued walking. Hinata just smiled as she blushed slightly. They stopped for a cup of coffee for her and an energy drink for him, and they chatted quietly about dinner and the movie, and Kiba came up briefly in the conversation. Naruto glowered when Hinata recounted how hard he had squeezed her bottom, but then they changed the subject and talked about anything in general that they could think of. Naruto smiled happily as he watched her stir her drink, and he wondered why it took him so long to notice her before. Late bloomer. Naruto frowned inwardly and Fana snickered at his discomfort. Oh, we are talking again. For the time being. Naruto finished his energy drink, then looked at his watch. Wow. It's midnight already. Well, come on, Hinata. I'll walk you home. Hinata smiled and blushed lightly, and Naruto wondered why she had that look on her face. It seemed like she was hiding something. When they got to the turn for her house, she pulled Naruto by his arm and he shrugged, thinking she wanted to walk some more so the date wouldn't end. Imagine his surprise when, as they walked and talked, she suddenly stopped and he realized they were in front of his house. Time seemed to stop, and he didn't know what to say or what to do as she smiled at him. For those of you that need warnings. Neji smiled as he traced an obscure design along her spine, and she moaned slightly, then arched her back. She looked over her shoulder at him and grinned as his fingers moved down but paused before delving inward. Please. Don't make me beg. Neji chuckled, then plunged his fingers in, and she gasped as she clenched the pillow and sheets, thrusting her hips back against his hand. Neji reached over and picked up his tea and sipped it as she moaned louder and breathed faster. Moments after he started, she collapsed to the bed, shuddering and biting the pillow as the orgasm blew through her, shattering her senses as her muscles clenched and flexed with each pulse she felt deep inside of herself, until it subsided, leaving only a dull roar in her ears. She looked at him, her hair partially obscuring her face as she panted. Thank you, Neji. Thank you. Neji grinned at Tenten as he licked his fingers, making her moan in misery. Please. Let me have you. Neji laughed as he got up and walked to the dresser, and pulled a small box from the top drawer. Taking a leaf from the box, he closed it and placed it back in the drawer. He walked over, and as he got closer, Tenten opened her mouth and stuck out her tongue, and Neji placed the leaf on her tongue and she swallowed it whole, then opened her mouth and wagged her tongue at him suggestively. They had been doing this for months. Tenten and Neji had been dating for years secretly, and the relationship was quite neutral for many months, holding hands occasionally, even less hugging, and even less kissing. Anything else was completely out of the question. Then one day Neji confided to Lee that he was thinking of breaking up with her because she didn't seem to care about him. Lee, just as Neji had planned, told Tenten what he knew. Tenten was furious at first and she confronted him with her infamous anger. Neji remained calm and told her the truth. He was tired of feeling like they were good friends and nothing more. She stormed off and he did not see her for 2 days before he came home one day and found her sitting at the front gate waiting for him. In order for them to stay together, she confided a deep, dark secret she didn't want anyone to know. Tenten was a tough bitch on the outside, but all she wanted was for the right man to tell her what to do, to dominate her completely, because deep inside of her, she wanted to be controlled. She wanted the freedom of being an object. While the thoughts to Neji were alien, he knew that it intrigued him. When Tenten saw him wavering, she got on her knees in front of him, placing her head on the floor at his feet, and she begged to be his object. She had fallen in love with Neji, but because of the way she was forced to live and grow up, she had to be something that she didn't want to be, in charge. Her father had originally wanted a son, so he could teach him and develop him to take his place, but his parents had gone to great extremes to have Tenten, and afterwards her mother was unable to have more children. So even disappointed, her father trained, and taught her everything he knew, BTU above all, he tried to erase her feminine side. But even though she had become hard and cold, the woman in her still yearned for what she wanted in her heart of hearts. So when she realized she would lose the only man she ever loved, she dropped her pride, she dropped her tough side, and this relationship had developed, and to be honest Neji was like a pig in slop, and Tenten finally had what she wanted. By day she was the iron bitch, as some called her behind her back, but at night with Neji she was one of the happiest women in the world. Undress me Tenny. Tenten came off the bed and leaned over and used her mouth to unbutton his shirt, then pull it off of him and carried it over to a chair and laid it across the back. Seductively she walked back, then pulled the sash from his waist, then carried it to the chair and laid it across the back too. Finally she undid his pants and pulled them down and placed a loving kiss on his left thigh before picking up his pants and placing them with the rest of his clothing. All of this was done without the use of her hands. Tenten had done everything with just her mouth, much to Neji's pleasure. Very good Tenten. I will not have to punish you tonight. She nodded and blushed lightly. Thank you my lord. It pleases me when you are happy with me. Neji stepped closer and she dropped to her knees in front of him, but he held up a hand to forestall her. I have a feeling Hinata will need advice soon about delicate things. I would like for you to give her whatever advice she asks for, and make her as comfortable as possible with the idea of sex. Tenten smiled and Neji got a jolt of pleasure as he saw the proverbial wheels turning in her mind. So I should make it possible for her and Naruto to go the final step. She did not say it as a question and Neji nodded and smiled. She was well aware of Neji's machinations, and while she did not completely approve of the methods he would employ to accomplish them, she would not disobey him either. He had earned her trust as well as her love, she would not betray him. That's my girl. Now Tenny, please me. Tenten needed no other encouragement. Naruto smiled as he looked at Hinata, then chuckled. Oh, I guess you're not ready to go home yet. Hinata smiled and shook her head as she blushed lightly. Not quite yet. The blush didn't leave her cheeks as she looked at him, in fact it intensified. I thought it would be nice to just lie around and talk. Sounds like fun. Naruto walked up to the door and unlocked it, then stood aside so Hinata could go in. After she had passed him, he closed the door behind her and locked it as he went to the kitchen to get something for them to drink. Hinata, you want some tea? Hinata smiled as she took a bag she had left next to the couch earlier that day and went upstairs. No thank you Naruto-kun. I am going to go to the bathroom. She looked in each room until she found the bathroom, then quietly snuck in and closed the door. Naruto nodded from the kitchen as he opened the refrigerator. Okay. I'm going to get a soda for me. Looking around in the refrigerator, he took out a cola and popped it open and had a healthy chug before he went back into the living room and sat on the couch, a big smile on his face. It had been a fun night and he was glad to spend the extra time with her before he would walk her home. He hoped there would not be a confrontation with the guards or Hiyashi himself. The man was a real stiff if half of what he had heard was true. Naruto was not so much worried for himself, but Hinata. He didn't want to see or hear about her getting yelled at or punished. So far, despite recent thoughts, everything was going beautifully. The movie was great, the food was really good, despite the lack of ramen, and Hinata looked awesome in that dress, and she was more open and responsive to him. He was still a little shocked that she hadn't worn a bra or even panties. But, he loved her anyway, and he got to see a part of her that he never thought he would. That was definitely worth a little embarrassment. He thought about her, then realized what was in his mind that he hadn't touched on yet. Part of his worry was that she would always be painfully shy. Granted, he never noticed that before, but now that he was dating her, even though it was cute, it could cause her problems later. According to Jiraiya and Kakashi, shy people got taken advantage of. And I don't want that to happen to Hinata. The other problem was mostly with him. If he was a late bloomer, as Fana put it, would he be able to make her happy when the time came? After a few minutes of considering, he decided to put it in the back of his mind, and maybe talk to Jiraiya about it in the future. Naruto heard the toilet flush from upstairs and blinked as he realized she didn't pass him in the kitchen to use the bathroom. After a few seconds he shrugged. It wasn't like he had anything to hide from her, she could go anywhere in his house she wanted. He took another good chug of soda, and reminisced about the movie as he waited for Hinata to come back to the living room. After a few more minutes though, when she didn't come down, he looked up towards the stairs. Hinata, is everything okay? When she didn't answer, he got up and went upstairs, but when he saw the bathroom door open, he was not sure what to think. As he passed his bedroom, a little light was on in the room over by the bed and he blinked. He didn't remember having a light that small in there before. As he stood in the doorway, he noticed the light added a soft, inviting atmosphere to the room. Homie, feeling if you will. Naruto-kun, your bed is very soft. Her voice was sultry and low as he took a step into the room. It took a few seconds, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw her lying on the bed under the covers. Hinata-chan, why are you in my bed? Are you sleepy? Wait. She's in my bed. Laughing, she sank deeper under the covers, but no answer was forthcoming. Naruto grinned as he thought of the few things that make having slumber parties fun. He rocked back, took 2 big steps forward, then hopped onto the bed too, causing her to bounce around, and she giggled before hitting him with a pillow. Oh, is that how you want it? Naruto picked up the pillow, then hit her with it, and she laughed. At that point, the battle was on. Naruto was surprised. Hinata was pretty good with a pillow as she actually stunned him a couple of times, but after a few failed attempts he caught her with a pillow haymaker, and Hinata went down for the count. After a few minutes and the covers and pillows getting thrown around, Naruto noticed that she had changed. Hinata was wearing what looked like a pink, cotton, pajama set. The top was a tank top with a unicorn print on the front. The bottoms were capri style with another print on the right thigh that said, "I'm horny." Naruto snickered as he caught the pun, and realized it didn't mean anything dirty. Hinata must like cartoon characters, and she definitely looked cute in them, but almost immediately a flush ran up his face as he thought about the ramifications of her in pajamas in his house, in his bed. In my bed. Hinata saw his reaction and blushed too. Naruto-kun, I hope you don't mind, but I do not want to go home tonight. I want to stay here, with you. Her earnest expression, and the twinkle in her eye gave him the hint that it was innocent, but if something almost naughty happened, he would still be in her good graces. Still, he had to make sure because he was a gentleman, and very much in uncharted territory. Are you sure, Hinata-chan? I mean, are you sure you want to spend the night in here with me? I do have 3 other bedrooms and they are fully furnished. Hinata looked at him with that same twinkle, then giggled. Of course, Naru-kun. I decided this earlier today, before going to see Tsunade. We spend all of our time together, why not our sleep time too? I trust you, and I know you will not take advantage of me, and I feel comfortable and safe around you. More so than in my own bedroom. Naruto considered for a moment, then nodded to her. He was all set to let it go, but then he had a flash of insight that could be very bad if he didn't bring it up and try to deter her at least one more time. But, won't your cousin and father be furious? Hinata smiled as she touched his cheek. Neji. No, my father yes. But my father never goes back to my room unless he is in that section of the house talking to Hanabi. He stopped visiting me in my room a long time ago. Naruto sensed an underlying feeling of sadness, so he reached over and rubbed her leg. Hinata smiled appreciatively, then held his hand. Besides, Neji said he would rumple my bed before morning so the servants will think I slept there and not report it back to my father so the chance of him noticing I am gone are slim and none, and Slim left town. She stopped for a moment and thought about what she said while Naruto laughed from her joke. She giggled a little too because she did not have very many opportunities to crack jokes, but she decided she would try more in the future because Naruto's laugh while wild was very infectious. When it seemed he was done laughing, because you never can tell with Naruto, she expressed a new thought. Neji has changed much since you have been gone. I have come to trust him where before he frightened me. Unlike my father, he has become concerned with my welfare and my happiness. She looked at Naruto and shifted gears again. Besides, if my father asks, I can always tell him I stayed at someone else's house. He does not really care what I do as long as there isn't a scandal. Naruto frowned as he considered her words. Yeah, but if someone found out, it could cause a big scandal. I don't want you to suffer because of me, Hinata-chan. That would hurt me more than anything I could describe. Hinata got a playful look on her face then pinched his cheek. That is why we have to make sure no one finds out, Naru-kun. It will be a problem only if someone finds out. Naruto grinned then pinched her cheek back but a lot gentler because he wasn't sure how delicate her skin was. I see. Well then I guess it will have to be our little secret. They lay there for a time just looking at each other and touching each other's face before Naruto jumped up and went to his dresser. Well, if you are ready for bed then I should get ready too. Before Hinata could say anything, Naruto jogged out of the bedroom, into the bathroom, and closed the bathroom door behind him. Hinata just smiled and shook her head. Sometimes he is like a big kid. Hinata then grabbed a pillow and hugged it very hard. But he is my big kid. With a squeal of happiness, and a huge blush she buried her face in the pillow and breathed deeply. I am in Naruto-kun's bed. Oh. Naruto washed his face then began brushing his teeth. He threw his clothes in a ball in the corner behind the door figuring he would get them in the morning. Wearing only a t-shirt and his boxers he brushed away all the nasties of the day before spitting and rinsing out the sink. As he looked up at the mirror he mused at all the things that had happened since he got back. At the outset, he was pretty sure he would be incredibly unhappy because of the lack of people he knew, and all the changes to the town itself. Konoha had grown outward as more people migrated to the hidden village for protection and a new life. But when he saw Ichiraku's, he decided to put aside the negatives and try to live in this new place. And now he was glad he did. The fun he had had, the fact that he had a girlfriend now, and she loved him no less, and in another day or so he would be going on a mission with her. And Neji. Naruto never expected to be on good terms with him, let alone friends. But here he was, and everything was proceeding happily, he only hoped it would continue to go that way. Things had definitely shaped up well for him. Better than he would have ever thought. Fana yawned immensely then stretched before getting comfortable again. Naruto groaned then turned inward to receive his dose of guidance. What? He grumped at his personal judge. Fana opened his eyes lazily. What? Naruto frowned. I thought you were going to say something. Fana blinked then shrugged before laying his head back down. Nope. You are doing fine on your own right now. Just remember to stop if she tells you to. Naruto nodded as he considered that. Well, of course. Geez, I'm not a creep or inconsiderate. It is not a matter of being creepy. If you and she were Myobu, the first time she would not be willing, you would have to take her. If she were a Myobu female you would have to grab her by the scruff of her neck so she couldn't rip your throat out with her fangs, then you would have to hold her in place so she couldn't get away, then. Naruto's eyes bugged out and he waved his arms at Fana and shouted at him at the top of his lungs. I don't need to know that. Fana snorted but said nothing else. Naruto waited until he calmed himself, and thoroughly washed his ears out, although it didn't help now that the thought was in his head, and quietly opened the door and turned off the bathroom light. As he walked into the bedroom Hinata was still laying there but she had her eyes closed so Naruto snuck a peek at the light source. It was a ceramic kitten that plugged into the wall and a bulb glowed from within providing soft light. Perhaps it was a night light. It fit her personality, and to be honest, he saw nothing wrong with having a night light. It was cute and like he thought earlier, it fit her. Naruto climbed carefully into the bed, intent on not disturbing her if she was asleep. Hinata smiled and turned to look at him with a slight blush on her face. Hello Naru-kun. Everything all better now. He smiled as he snuggled closer to her and placed a hand on her waist. Yeah, it's all good. I even have minty fresh breath. She giggled slightly but then cupped his face in her hands. Let me judge. Hinata leaned forward and kissed his lips softly, then pulled back and touched her tongue to her lips. Yes, it is definitely minty. Naruto grinned as he watched his girlfriend, but then she blushed again. What is wrong, Hina-chan? Confused, Naruto moved closer as she took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Do you remember the movie tonight? Naruto grinned and nodded vigorously. Do I? It was awesome. Hinata nodded also. Well, I was remembering the way they were kissing before the final battle with the robot, and, well, I wonder what it feels like. Hinata blushed again then shook her head. Before she could say anything else, Naruto moved closer to her and placed his lips against hers. At first she stiffened then melted against him as her arms came around behind him instinctively. Naruto remembered what Fana had told him previously, and touched his tongue lightly against her lips, and she breathed a little harder as she opened her mouth a little and his tongue touched hers ever so briefly and she gasped and pulled away for a moment. Oh, it made my heart jump. Naruto smiled, nodded as well as he wondered if his face was as red as hers. Mine too. Should we do it again? In his heart he was screaming, please, please, please. Over and over again. Hinata thought for a moment then nodded as she bit her bottom lip lightly. Naruto in his heart did a back flip and gave a thumbs up. Yosh. Naruto moved in and this time she met him halfway and their lips touched and seemed to open of their own accord as their tongues touched, and Hinata sighed as their kiss became deeper. Naruto had never felt anything as powerful as this. It was almost like his heart had burst and something magical had come out and filled his body. He never wanted to stop kissing her. He was sporting a serious chubby right now, which he tried to keep away from her, but she kept pulling herself closer and closer to him as she tried to get more of his tongue in her mouth and vice versa. Hinata seemed to be breathing heavier and it caused Naruto to speed up as well as her fingers would tighten, and squeeze the flesh on his back over and over again. One of her hands made its way to the back of his head and held on for what seemed like dear life as her tongue began to move furiously over his. Naruto finally reached over and pulled her closer, giving up on the idea of her avoiding something that he had no control over. He reached down and grabbed Hinata's closest leg, and wrapped it over his, which she immediately grapevined around his leg. All the while passion flared and raged in both of them as they kissed harder and faster. Naruto suddenly broke the kiss, but before she could utter a protest his lips began kissing her neck and she moaned and said his name over and over again. She tasted so sweet, and smelled so good he didn't want to stop. He looked up into her face and smiled before they began to kiss again. Curiosity got the better of Naruto though. During the kiss his hand seemed to take on a mind of its own and came to rest on her bottom. At first Hinata didn't notice because she was too caught up in the moment, but when his fingers started to explore she broke the kiss and looked at him. Naru-kun, I am your girlfriend, and there is only one thing that I would deny to you, my virginity. It is meant for my husband. Naruto frowned, not catching the reference but understood as soon as he realized that his hand was at the bottom of her bottom, and in another few seconds would have been where no man had gone before. Oh shit. I'm sorry Hina-chan, I wasn't thinking. And he jerked his hand away from her body. Hinata smiled and shook her head and reached out and took his hand and blushed as she placed it on her backside again. As my boyfriend, the outside is yours. Touch it as much as you want or need when we are alone. But only the man I will marry will have all of me. I hope you understand and that is acceptable to you. I hope it will be you. Since Naruto had never had a girlfriend before, and had never touched a woman intentionally like this before, he was not sure what to say. He did run his hand lightly over her bottom, which made her sigh and visibly shiver. I understand, and I accept it Hina-chan. I just didn't want to upset you. She smiled as she hugged a pillow tight to her chest and looked at him over it. I love you Naru-kun. Naruto smiled then reached over with his hands and rubbed her lower back. Hinata closed her eyes and stretched like a cat as Naruto moved his hands upward and started rubbing more of her back and neck before moving back down and massaging her legs. Oh Naru-kun, that feels so good. Naruto smiled as he watched her. He found himself actually enjoying just hearing her happy. He knew that she deserved to be happy and he was more than glad to make it happen for her. After a while Naruto's fingers started to cramp, so he stopped to stretch them and lay back down on the bed next to her. As he looked down at her face he realized he had put her to sleep. He smiled, then shook his head slightly before leaning over and kissing her on the forehead. She sighed and smiled happily as he lay down next to her and closed his eyes as well. If Hinata had known what was coming, however, she probably would have chosen to stay awake. Naruto yawned, then opened his eyes because he felt a bad cramp in his shoulder. It wasn't debilitating, but it definitely reduced his comfort level enough that it woke him. Looking to his left side, he remembered the night before and smiled despite the discomfort he felt. Hinata had both of her legs wrapped around his left one and she had his arm ensnared with both of hers and pressed completely against her body. At some point during the night they had traded sides, it seemed, so Naruto was now on the right of the bed and Hinata was on the left. It confused him a little as he considered it, but she was still fully dressed in her pajamas, and she didn't look the worst for wear, so he let the mystery slide. Looking at her sleeping face, he marveled at the cuteness he saw there. She seemed like a little baby, clinging desperately to him. A tender feeling came over him, something he did not remember ever feeling before, and smiled as he looked at her. Her lower lip was pushed out a little in a pout and he almost laughed at how cute she looked. He watched her, but then new thoughts began to make him wonder about things he had never had before. Is this what love is? Is it the common ability to wake up in the morning and see someone lying next to you and knowing that their presence can provide you more comfort than 100 friends? Naruto shook his head and lightly touched her chin with his finger, which made her sigh and smile in her sleep. Was this love? Unfortunately, a pressure in his lower abdomen broke his train of thought and forced him to face that as much as he would have loved to stay in bed, he had a function to attend to and it was starting to become urgent. Something told him not to drink that last soda. Carefully he withdrew his leg from hers, eliciting a whimper from her, and her face returned to its original pout. She seemed even more unhappy than before, but despite the movement, she did not wake up. As he slowly tried to take back his arm, she whined and clung tighter to him, her brow furrowing slightly. Naruto reached over and slowly stroked her face and hair with his other hand and made quiet shushing sounds, and she settled down again and he slowly was able to take his arm back from her. Carefully he placed the spare pillow in her arms. Immediately as soon as it touched her chest, her arms encircled it, and her knees came up, partially trapping it against her, and she sighed again, before her breathing deepened. With a quiet sigh of his own, Naruto crept to the bathroom and let out a groan of relief as he emptied his bladder's contents. After almost a minute, he finished and washed his hands before flushing the toilet and quietly creeping back to the bedroom. He watched for a few moments as she breathed quietly and he wished he could just crawl back in bed with her. Thinking really hard about it, he finally sighed, again, before he reached over and pulled the cover up to cover her and the pillow. Regretfully he turned away from the warm bed and the beautiful girl in it to head downstairs to the kitchen. Naruto knew she didn't mind eating ramen with him, but he thought he should make her something special, or at least something different. Opening the cabinet and seeing nothing but ramen made him take a deep breath and slowly let it out. Well, I gotta do something about this. Sneaking back upstairs, he closed the bedroom door a little, then went into the bathroom and quickly got dressed. Using his fingers he gave his hair a quick once over, then went down to put on his shoes. After grabbing his money pouch, he walked out the front door, and jogged out into the morning air in search of groceries. Oh. Hinata turned around as fast as she could, but could not find him. She knew she lost someone, a male, but she had no idea where he was or even who he was. Using her Byakugan she scanned all around her, but she couldn't find anyone. Literally. There was no one within the range of the Byakugan, which was surprising because her field of vision could encompass up to 100 yards easily if she didn't use it at full circle. Unsure of where she was, she started walking down the street, but everywhere she looked all she saw was empty buildings. Where was everyone, and why was she the only one here? Why was she alone in this city? She didn't even know what city this was or where it was located. It wasn't Konoha. She knew that for sure, but she had no clue what city it was. She started to feel really uneasy as she kept walking. Just then a fox came from out of a building, a cute little thing. It stopped in its tracks a few feet in front of her and looked up at her before barking lightly. Oh, are you alone too? She asked the fox as it sat there. Hinata thought about petting it, but wild animals sometimes carried rabies, so she thought better of it. The fox tilted its head at her, then turned and ran back into the building. Hinata was torn, debating what she should do. On the one hand, it was silly to follow a fox, especially one she didn't know. On the other hand, it was the only living thing that she had seen thus far. With a frown, she followed the fox into the building, hoping she wasn't making a big mistake. It moved rather quickly and she had a hard time following it until it got to a doorway and stopped as if it were waiting for her. She also stopped at the top of the landing and caught her breath as the fox turned and ran through the open door. "Hey, wait!" Hinata shouted, but of course, it didn't. She staggered through the doorway and she saw a man with spiked yellow hair standing next to the window looking outward. He seemed calm, and his expression gave nothing away to her. She thought very hard and a name came to her. Naruto-kun. He turned and smiled at her and nodded. She knew the name, but the man still eluded her for some reason, although it did make her strangely comfortable to think of the name. He stepped away from the window and came towards her and a sense of unease filled her. Strange. The name made her feel calm, but this person that looked like him did not. She had trouble grasping this, unless this wasn't the real Naruto. He had a smile on his face, but there was something not quite right about it. Less than 3 feet from her he stopped and took off his coat, dropping it to the floor. She stood shocked as the coat disappeared, and when it did, so did her jacket. It just faded out as if it had never been on her. The sense of unease gripped her again, more firmly this time as he undid his shirt, and Hinata felt dread settle in the pit of her stomach as he dropped it to the floor and her shirt went the way of her jacket. With a little yelp she covered her with her hands. Of course she still had a bra on, but she had never been so bare before a man before, not even her Naruto-kun. Wait, her Naruto-kun. What did that mean? Was this man her love? Memories began to trickle back to her and she began to see what she had somehow forgotten. Wait. Did she love Naruto? Yes. Yes, she did love him, so why couldn't she remember? And if she did love him, why was she so afraid of being in front of him? Wouldn't that be something they were used to? But this couldn't be. Naruto couldn't change shape. Could he? The doppelganger undid his pants and gave the waistband a little wiggle before dropping them unceremoniously to the floor. Hinata panicked now because just like all of her other articles of clothing, her pants disappeared too as soon as they hit the floor, leaving her with the unenviable task of trying to cover herself with 2 inadequate hands. She watched him and his smile became comical as it was bigger than the lower half of his face. It seemed to stretch around his face to the back of his head, but she did not want to try and maneuver her way behind him to check. As she stood there, his tongue came out and hung down to his waist as he salivated over her state of undress. If that weren't bad enough, he had a monstrous bulge in the front of his boxer shorts that could not be real. Anatomically, if he had sex with a normal woman, he would impale her on it, if it didn't split her in half. Hinata backed against a wall, but there was still nothing she could cover herself with except her hands. She looked frantically for the door, but it was gone. I must be under the influence of a genjutsu, she thought, but despite making the hand sign, and pouring chakra into the effort, the scene did not change. The Naruto doppelganger, because this couldn't be the man she loved, watched her, smiling still until she finally looked at him again. Slowly he hooked his thumbs in the waistband of the boxers he wore and wiggled his eyebrows at her suggestively as Hinata blushed almost purple and started to panic. Please, don't. My body is only for the eyes of the man I love. You cannot do this to me. The horror was she knew she loved Naruto, but she could not remember why, and no matter how she racked her brain, nothing he had done to foster these emotions in her would come to her. It grinned but then shrugged as it lowered the shorts to the ground and Hinata stood, and horrified. Crouching down and trying to shield her from this inhuman monster, she screamed at him. I am meant for another. You cannot have me. Its mouth opened as it stood there, and a single word whisked out that she barely heard. Who? Her mind froze up as she thought about it. Who? It must be this Naruto she kept thinking about. But why? If she truly was meant for him, if she truly was his, why wouldn't she give him everything? As she pondered this, a strange caricature of herself appeared next to the fake Naruto. Its were ridiculously large, at least twice as big as Tsunade's, and her waist was so tiny Naruto could wrap his fingers around it and they would touch tip to tip. This strange version of herself grinned and licked her lips lasciviously as she unashamedly stripped, then lay down in front of the fake Naruto, and spread her legs for his attention. Hinata was sickened by the display, but deep inside of her she felt the pull of perversion, and she could feel herself growing wet. She wanted to run forward and slap the dirty version of herself, but she was rooted to the spot as she watched the fake Naruto prepare to mount the fake Hinata. No! She screamed, and both Naruto and Hinata looked at her in confusion, so she barreled ahead with her opinion. Have you no decency? Have you no shame? The fake Hinata looked at her, then shrugged and answered her in her own voice. No. Why should I? Hinata shook her head in disbelief. This cannot be. She was not like that inside of herself, was she? Still unsure, she tried again. It isn't proper. You cannot behave as a wanton woman. The strange version of herself frowned in disappointment at her. I can, for the one, for he will accept me as his. Hinata frowned at the brazen use of such horrid words. Was this really what lay deep inside of her subconscious? Hinata blinked as she thought about it. Still, she had one final defense she could throw at her. You have to save yourself for the one who will be your husband, the one that will never abandon you. But the fake version, or inner version of herself, merely laughed at her. Foolish child. I have done that since that fateful day when we were 7, or have you forgotten that too? At Hinata's blank look she stood and walked over, and to Hinata's horror touched her on her forehead. But the hand did not stop there. It sank in until Hinata was left alone with the disturbing Naruto. And then it came rushing back, like a thunderclap. She remembered. She remembered everything, especially that day. Flashback. She was sitting near the water crying, and her knees had been skinned when she fell on the walk path. Unfortunately, it wasn't a natural fall. Some older children, up to no good, had knocked her down and taken her candy. Now this was no ordinary candy. It was one of those giant swirl lollipops that parents really shouldn't give their children, but did anyway because they looked cute eating it. It was one of the last presents her father had ever given her before her mother died, and he changed. She begged and pleaded with the older boy to give it back, but he just kicked her in the stomach and ran off with his 2 friends. There was no reason for them to run. She was just a little Hyuga brat, and wouldn't remember them anyway, so they were in no hurry to get away. So here she sat, crying for the present she no longer had and the strength she didn't possess to defend herself, but hope was only a footstep away. A voice behind her made her jump slightly and look to its source. He was roughly the same age as she was, but he was dirty, and his clothes were torn. His hair was dirty and unkempt, but looked like it would be a bright yellow. His eyes were the prettiest blue she had ever seen, and he had cute little whisker marks on his cheeks. She was a bit apprehensive, because maybe he would hurt her the way the other boys did. But he smiled at her and squatted down in front of her a few feet away. Why you cry? No cry. He shook his head to her as if to emphasize his point, and his voice seemed to quiver a bit, as if seeing her sad was hurting him. Then the memory of her lost lollipop came back and she started to blubber as she pointed after the assailants. 3 boys took my candy, the one my daddy gave me, and the biggest one kicked me in my tummy. As she pointed to the injury she started to bawl again, rubbing her eyes with both hands, so she didn't notice the look on the boy's face. Naruto gritted his teeth and looked in the direction Hinata had pointed. No cry, he said as he patted her hand. I be back. Hinata nodded as she watched him get up, tears still evident, and he ran in the direction the bullies had gone. He was gone for a long time, and after a while she thought maybe he had forgotten about her, so her thoughts began to drift to other worries. Her mother would scold her for being away from the compound so long, and she didn't want to get scolded, so she got to her feet to go home. Maybe her father would not be cross with her for losing her lollipop. Hey, wait. She turned quickly around, and there was the wild boy. And he had her lollipop. He stopped a few steps from her, and she felt fear for him. His left eye was closed, and he had a fat lip as well as scratches on various parts of his body that she could see, but he was smiling at her as he handed her the lollipop. Her heart jumped and she was so happy, but then she noticed a difference. This wasn't the lollipop her father had given her, it was a brand new one still in the plastic. She looked at him questioningly and he smiled sheepishly, rubbing the back of his neck. Sorry, they already eat it. So I kicked butts. But no lollipop for you, so I bought. In truth, he told the Hokage what had happened, and he bought the new one. The third Hokage was very impressed with Naruto's bravery, so in truth, he wouldn't refuse his request. Hinata would have liked the one her father had given her, but this stranger not only took a beating for her, but spent money to replace what was taken from her. Something didn't need to do, and no one else had ever done for her. For the first time that she could remember, she was touched by this act of thoughtfulness. Hinata leaned over and hugged him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered to him. Naruto was so surprised he just shrugged as he stood there uncomfortably. No one had ever hugged him before, except that one woman, and she had pale eyes too. Hinata. She turned in the direction of the voice and immediately recognized it as her mother's. She turned to tell the wild boy, but he was gone. She frowned, but then ran to her mother when she came into view, but on that day she made a child's vow as she walked home at her mother's side. "I will marry him, and we will be happy forever." Present. The memory faded, but it still remained bright enough to recall details, and her eyes widened. "I didn't remember, but I do now, Naruto-kun, even then he sacrificed for me." The doppelganger nodded at her and started to walk closer to her, but she screamed as she realized its intent, and threw her original argument at it. "No, you cannot have me." He smiled at her and whispered one word. "Why?" Without hesitation she answered immediately. "Because I am meant for one person, and you are not him." Again the thing looked at her, his smile getting wider as he responded to her with one word again. "Who?" This time Hinata wasn't afraid and she blurted out what she was no longer afraid to say. "Naruto. I am meant for Naruto. My Naruto-kun." The creature grinned as a mist began to form, coming up from the ground, enshrouding them both as it stepped back, deeper into it. "Prove it," were the last words she heard as the mist came up, and Hinata found it more and more difficult to breathe. The mist surrounded her and she thrashed against the floor and screamed. "Oh, oh, Hinata, wake up." Naruto had her by the shoulders and was shaking her as she opened her eyes. What happened?" Naruto frowned as he slowly released his grip on her. "You were screaming and I was shaking you, trying to wake you up." Hinata tried to sit up but found she couldn't, and as she tried harder it became hard for her to breathe again. Before she panicked, Naruto placed a hand on her shoulder and held her in place. "Wait, you have the sheet wrapped around your neck." Hinata didn't move for a few seconds as he loosened it, then slowly sat up and got out of bed. The side she slept on was soaked with sweat and she felt like she had been beaten down. I think I had a nightmare. It was strange, a little scary." Naruto sat on the edge of the bed and nodded. "It must have been a doozy." Hinata took a deep breath then let it out slowly. After a few seconds her eyes misted up and Naruto opened his arms as he saw her make a beeline for him and he enfolded her tight against his chest as she sobbed. Hey, it's okay, it was only a nightmare. You're fine, you're safe now. Your nightlight is here and so am I. I won't let anything hurt you." Naruto looked at the kitten nightlight as if to say, "Hey, help me out here." But the kitten offered no assistance. Hinata cried like that for a while and clung desperately to Naruto as he rubbed her back. Wow. That really must have been one bad dream. As she pushed her face against his chest he could hear her words, slightly muffled by her position. I love you, Naruto-kun, I really do. I love you with all of my heart. Naruto nodded and kissed her softly. "I know you do. I know, you don't have to do this to yourself. I know you love me." Hinata said nothing else for a time until she got the crying under control and it was reduced to the occasional sniffle. "I know it was just a dream, but it made me feel helpless and alone, and I do not like to feel that way. Especially after finally being able to admit to you how I feel and having you in my life now. I can't go back to being alone, I won't." Naruto felt his eyes moisten as well. This was an emotion he had felt all too well, and now that he wasn't alone he didn't want to be alone again either. He did his best to calm her, but she kept trembling against him, and even though she wasn't bawling anymore, tears still streamed down her cheeks. Most human females want the reassurance. They want to know that they are needed and wanted. She needs to hear it from you and only then will she feel better. "How do you feel about her pup?" Naruto blinked as he thought back at Fana. What do you mean how do I feel?" Fana gnashed his teeth then took in a deep breath and let it out. "It is not a difficult question. As she lays there in your arms, crying and needing your support. How do you feel about her?" Naruto frowned as he thought about it, actually considering his feelings. I do like her. I don't want to see her sad or upset, and I do feel good when she is with me. In the time I have known you, I have always known you were wishy-washy, but I knew that was because you have not been treated right, but your own indecision can cause an immense amount of pain to those you are closest to. Let me ask you, and be honest with yourself if not me. Do you love her? Naruto looked down at her head and smiled as he rubbed her back and cooed at her. Do I love her? Is this what love feels like? I don't know. Fana shook his head then tsked in what seemed like disgust before laying his head back on his paws again. When you wake up, let me know. Naruto turned inward screaming at the fox. What the hell is that supposed to mean? But Fana was either fast asleep or ignoring him. The words themselves didn't bother him, but the way they were said. Almost like Fana was ashamed of him. Before he could think further on it, Hinata looked up, tears still appearing in her eyes, and kissed Naruto on his chin. I love you, Naruto-kun. Please always remember that I love you. Naruto looked into her eyes and saw the truth of her words, and he leaned down and kissed her lips. Come on, Hina-chan. I bought us some breakfast, and we still have a bunch to do today before we leave tomorrow. Hinata nodded and he helped her stand, and she went to the bathroom while he went downstairs to check on the rolls in the oven. Naruto took the kettle from the stove and poured the hot water over a tea ball, and he thought that when they got back from their mission he would go buy her some of her favorite tea, or maybe he would get her something special. Fana's words seemed to bore through his brain straight to his soul as he moved around in the kitchen getting their breakfast ready. Was this love? Did he love her? Oh. Hinata came downstairs slowly as she considered the dream and what it must mean. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and stared through the doorway at Naruto as he made breakfast for her, and she smiled despite the turmoil she was feeling. Prove it, the deformed Naruto said to her. What could she do to prove that she loved him? Would she have to give her chastity to him? Did she have to do it? Hinata checked over her gear again and nodded as she secured her pack. Everything was ready. All she needed was to take everything to Naruto's house and they would leave at 5 am. Looking through it one last time, she counted off her camping equipment. Check. Extra set of clothes. Check. Weapons. Check. Field rations. Check. With a satisfied nod, she closed her pack, then picked it up, moving it beside the door to her bedroom. Next she checked a little something else she was taking, but this would stay at Naruto-kun's house. In the carry-all bag were pairs of panties, bras, clothes, both formal and casual, and a toiletry kit for her soap and other necessities. In truth, she had bought the bag and toiletry kit so she could go to slumber parties with her friends. Unfortunately, that never really happened, so she was glad she was going to get some use out of it now since it had collected so much dust in her closet. Hinata dropped her carry-all next to her pack on the floor, then walked over and fell face down across her bed with a sigh. Breakfast was nice with Naruto this morning, but that dream still disturbed her. It didn't seem likely that something like that could happen, but there were definitely things in the dream that had been on her mind since she and Naruto began talking when he returned to the village. He liked her, that was obvious, but did he love her? And if he didn't, would he ever love her? Her father and her clan already looked down on her for every little thing, but if she gave her virginity to Naruto, and then he dumped her, it would be the caged bird seal. Her father would probably disown her, and no telling what else would be levied against her. She was very serious about keeping her chastity for the man she would marry, but she already knew in her heart that if that man wasn't Naruto, she did not want to marry anyone. What good would a marriage be without love? She thought to herself. She tried after he left to move on, sort of. It seemed that there was no telling when he would return or even if he would return. Sure, they had said 3 years, but what if something had happened? What if he had been shot or killed? Happily he wasn't, but the truth was no matter how she thought about it or tried, she could not look at anyone the same way she saw Naruto. He was the center of her heart, and always would be. She wasn't sure that she believed in soulmates, but if there was such a thing, then Naruto was hers. She just hoped that she was his as well. A light tapping at her door made her turn towards it. She wasn't expecting anyone, and she could tell from the knock it wasn't her father, so she didn't panic immediately. Well, no sense making them wait. Come in. Neji walked in and smiled at her. Hello, cousin. I know you are going on a mission tomorrow, so I thought I would come by and see if you needed anything. Hinata nodded as she thought about it then shrugged. There really was no one else she trusted to talk to about this subject, so she sat up on her bed and looked at him in a serious manner. Close the door, Neji. I think I need advice and I do not know who else to ask. Neji frowned slightly then nodded before turning to and closing her door, but before coming over to sit with her, he placed a seal over the door for privacy. Sound could come in, but would not go out. At least their conversation would be private. What can I do for you, Hinata? You know it is my honor to help you in any way I can. He said as he sat in the chair at her personal desk. Hinata fidgeted with her fingers for a moment as she tried to find the words she would need, but no matter how she formulated the question it just felt wrong to her. After a couple of failed attempts she decided to take a page from Naruto and just blurted it out. Neji, do I deserve to be loved the way that I love? Neji frowned deeply as he sat in the chair in front of her desk. His mind began to work as he considered what would happen if she began to start having doubts about the depth of her love. Neji decided to hold nothing back and threw his first answer at her in the form of a question. I assume you refer to Naruto. From your question you love him but you do not think he loves you. Hinata nodded slowly then wrung her hands in frustration. It isn't that he doesn't care about me, I know he does and I know he enjoys my company, but he has yet to tell me that he loves me. Heck, we were dating and he didn't even tell me or ask me if I wanted to be his girlfriend. Neji nodded as he thought about it. He would probably have to have another one-on-one with Naruto, but it would have to be on a more intimate subject. But, to the problem at hand. He thought before continuing his conversation. Well, cousin, I do not know everything but I do know when a man loves he expects the woman he loves to give him everything and anything. Men and women are very different in their outlook of life. I know this might be a little difficult or embarrassing for you to understand but hear my words and try to absorb the knowledge I will give you. This is too good, he thought to himself as he kept his face calm and collected, beginning to weave the skein he had originally planned. Hinata nodded then sat forward on her bed, hugging her pillow to her chest. Her look said she would do anything for the answer to her dilemma. A man gives love, so that he can have sex with the woman he loves. A woman gives a man sex, so that he will continue to love her. Now before you become angry and deny what I say, understand that that is a very simplistic explanation, and there is a little more to it than that, but that is the basic truth about men and women. One cannot be had without the other. As it is, I love Tenten, but I did not tell her that until she finally gave me all of her. Hinata frowned around the blush she wore then shook herself slightly. So you think Naruto would love me, if we had sex? Neji smiled inwardly. Oh, most definitely. That is one of the reasons why Tenten and I have been together so long. Hinata gasped as her eyes got bigger. So you and Tenten have been having sex? Neji nodded as he crossed his legs. Since the first year after we started dating. It was a few months or so, and we had a little discussion about it, but in the end she saw logic in my reasoning. Other than the occasional disagreement, have you ever seen us fight? Hinata shook her head and looked at her hands in thought. No, you guys do not fight. But, what about my chastity? I have to remain pure for my husband, don't I? Neji grinned as he reached over and patted her on the knee. Of course, if you stay with traditional standards. There are people our age, however, who have thrown away that outdated custom in favor of enjoying their life with the ones they love. But tell me, do you know already who that man will be? This was spoken with a slight smirk as his eyebrows crawled up under his head wrap in a questioning way. Hinata opened her mouth to say something then stopped as she thought about it then smiled. I know who my husband will be. Naruto-kun will be my husband. Looking a bit skeptical, Neji folded his arms across his chest. Are you certain? Hinata smiled a little sadly but nodded. Yes, there won't be anyone else. If for some reason Naruto and I do not marry, there will be no other man in my life. Hinata looked down at her hands, which were wrapped painfully tight around the pillow before she looked at her cousin again. Nor would I want another man if I cannot have him. Neji smiled then nodded. Then giving your chastity to him would not be a crime, would it? Hinata blushed lightly again then nodded more to herself than to Neji. I guess I always knew that, but I clung to the idea that we had to be married so people wouldn't talk. So I would not embarrass the clan. This was said somewhat bitterly as she wrung her hands. Neji chuckled lightly then shrugged as he watched her. It does not matter if you give someone a scandal or not, people will always talk. The ones who do usually have nothing better to do with their lives. If someone does spread an unsavory rumor about you, I will be the first to defend you no matter who it is. And I have a feeling no matter the circumstance Naruto will feel the same. Hinata remembered the time Naruto got her candy back and smiled. They didn't even know each other then, and yet he had helped her without request or expectation of a reward. Because of that fact alone, she realized her dream was correct. There are no repercussions for being with the one you loved, but she would still have to be careful. Clan rules are clan rules. Neji, is there a way to hide, from the Byakugan? Her blush said it all. Neji nodded with a slight smirk. At first I had to hide Tentens. You would be surprised how nosy some of the members of our clan can be. When you need to hide your hymen, let me know. It is a simple jutsu that will hide the part of your body you want to appear to be normal. It can fool even the most experienced Byakugan user. It has fooled your father every time Tenten has come by. Before Hinata could respond, Neji became solemn and it made her pause. I know your character far better than anyone else does, Hinata, and I know despite everything you always try to do the right thing, so do the right thing now. I will protect you from any and all enemies, foreign or domestic. Never fear. Hinata beamed at Neji, then hugged her pillow tighter. Thank you, Neji. I hadn't realized things would be so complicated, and yet so simple. I know he will be my husband, so there is no crime in giving myself to him, but Neji, and Hinata blushed deeply. I do not know much about sex. I know how it is done, but I know there is more to it than just putting it in. Her voice trailed off as he nodded in understanding. He laughed lightly, but there was no meanness or callousness in it. Yes, there is. Excuse me for a moment. Neji got up and removed the seal, then stepped out into the hallway with a slight smile. He closed the door behind him. Hinata wondered if she said anything to upset him, but he didn't look upset. She thought back but didn't think she had. A few minutes later, Neji came back in and handed her a book before he reinstated the silence jutsu. She looked at it, then looked at Neji, her eyes wide. The Book of Love. Neji, is this what I think it is? Neji nodded and smiled slightly. It is a good book, with hand-drawn pictures of what to do and how. The book is designed to help couples understand their sexuality better and to make the act more pleasurable and even fun for both partners. I personally recommend it. Some of the things in there are very different than the things we were taught in the academy, so they may shock you, but do not discount anything until you have at least tried it once. Hinata blushed as her fingers gripped the book and she stared down at it. It was a plain brown book with no pictures on the outside cover. I will read this and do all I can so he will not want anyone else. Hinata stood and hugged Neji. Thank you, Neji-Nisan. You have helped me make a difficult decision and I can never repay you for it. Neji smiled as he returned the hug. Think nothing of it. In fact, if you and Naruto get married and have children, I will consider that thanks enough. They broke from the hug and he smiled at her before dropping the silence jutsu and walking to her door. Neji stopped halfway out of her room and looked at her again. The smile he displayed now was different. She didn't know how, but he looked like he was proud of her. Oh, best of luck on your mission tomorrow. I know you will do very well. Hinata blushed as she picked up her pack and tucked the book inside. His praise left her almost speechless and she felt her heart swell for him. She very much loved her cousin now. Thank you, Nisan. Oh. Neji's smile never left his face as he walked into his room and sat at his desk. Taking out his notebook and turning to his to-do list, he placed a check mark next to conviction of love. Making sure the ink was dry, he closed the book then locked it back within his desk. He felt the need to train, but not very hard. He would do some warm-ups and stretch before went through his katas. Perhaps he would even practice the one thing that had been the focus of his training recently. His thoughts drifted back to his project, and he nodded. Now, as long as neither of them dies, all things should begin to spiral inward until nothing can stop the chain of events. He thought as he took off his shirt and began to stretch. As soon as they reach the point of no return, I will begin phase 2. Neji's hands began to glow as he went through his exercises. Oh. Naruto finished rolling his bedroll and strapping it and his blanket to his pack when he heard a knock at the door. He smiled as he turned and sprinted to the door and at the last second, slid across the floor in his socks to stop in front of the threshold. Grin still in place, he had the urge to do something fun, and startle Hinata at the same time. Flinging the door open, he grabbed her and gave her a huge kiss. She meeped in surprise but then melted in his arms and kissed him back. Naruto walked backwards, still with her in his arms, and pulled her into the house and closed the door. Once the door was closed, Hinata wrapped a leg around his and pulled herself up to his face and kissed him with a hunger that surprised him, but overwhelmed his senses as well. This was different. Hinata became very vigorous and she seemed to be all over him at once. His first instinct was to pull back and look to make sure it was Hinata, but he knew her smell, and now he knew her tongue as well as her lips, so he returned it just as eagerly. After a few seconds he broke the kiss and looked in her face and saw that something was different about her. She seemed calmer, more confident, for lack of a better word. She pulled on his neck for him to kiss her again, but he resisted and she whined at him. "Naru-kun, please." The pout on her face and the pleading nature in her voice stirred something in him, and he searched her face and eyes but only saw her desire and love for him. Smiling, he nodded, then leaned down and kissed her again, and she moaned in the kiss before taking his bottom lip between her teeth and sucking lightly on it. Naruto moaned as his hands moved down on their own accord and he gripped her hips. She grunted at the feeling of his fingers firm on her flesh, and pulled herself against him, pressing her crotch firmly to his. As her body molded itself to him, he could feel his passion rising and his hips pushed against her involuntarily. Hinata gasped in the kiss, and her eyes got big, but after the initial shock of the contact she melted again and her own hips moved against his, and it was his turn to be shocked as the contact created sensations in him that he had never felt before. His mind began to float from the combination of the kiss and the physical contact. He knew levels of pleasure he had never imagined before, and the feeling of euphoria was better than anything he had ever experienced before. Hinata felt as if she were also floating on the same cloud as Naruto, as she had never experienced anything like this before. This was even better than their first kiss. How much better would sex be with him? Unfortunately, somewhere deep inside of her something gripped her and told her to stop, that it was wrong and she should not be spoiling herself in this way. Still, it was what she wanted, so she pushed the worry aside. That was the old Hinata, the warrior Hinata. And she would not let others dictate to her how her life should be again. After a few more minutes of kissing and grinding, Hinata pulled back and looked in his face, and she could see that he was almost overcome with the passion, but in his eyes there was something more she could not fathom. Naruto did his best not to lose control, but it felt like something deeper inside of him was about to give way to something bestial, more primal. He couldn't describe it better than that, and he desperately wanted to know what it was, but Fana was slumbering, it seemed, and would not respond to any of his pleas. It was different than when he used the fox's chakra. Whatever this was, it would not let go unless it got what it wanted. Naruto was afraid of what that might be, but he didn't know how to stop it except for one way. As Hinata looked into his eyes, he smiled at her, then leaned down and kissed her lightly, before he set her gently on the floor, then bolted through the kitchen and out the back door. The back door slamming was accentuated by a large splash in the pool. Hinata watched him run and realized what he was doing and thought to herself, "Oh no, you don't." As her face set in determination and she charged after him. Naruto got halfway across the pool and began to feel the lessening of his desires, when he heard the door slam and then a much quieter splash. When he turned around, what he had feared had come to pass. Hinata was already halfway to him and he panicked and tried to swim away. Hinata was obviously a much better swimmer and her form could be described as dolphin streaking towards him, graceful and beautiful. Sadly, Naruto's form could only be described as a hippo, missing 2 legs, and blind as he struggled to move away from her. He really wasn't that bad of a swimmer, when he was calm. But with Hinata bearing down on him, he panicked and tried too hard to get away. She caught up to him before he got 5 steps and wrapped her arms around him from behind and pulled herself along his body until she wrapped her legs around him as well, locking around his waist. As he reached the shallow end with her clinging to his back, she leaned over and gently bit his ear, which sent a tingle running from his ear to his hammer, before she tickled his ear with her throaty whisper. "I won't let you go. You're mine. So either stop trying to run from me, or tell me why you are running." Naruto stopped halfway out of the pool and blushed hard, and Hinata could see the red rise up his neck to his face. Slowly he walked to the edge of the pool and sat on the steps, and Hinata rested her bottom on the step above him but did not let him go. Naruto took a deep breath, then rested his hands on her legs, which were still wrapped around him. "Hinata, I like you a lot, but I am worried when we start doing things that I might lose control. Hinata completely glossed over the fact that he only said, like, and frowned as she worried over him losing control of himself. She knew about the fox, but she wasn't sure if that was what he was talking about. What do you mean? Naruto shrugged but rubbed her legs a little, like he was petting a cat. He seemed lost and confused, and Hinata hated to see him like this because she couldn't fix it unless he told her what was wrong. He took a deep breath then let it out before telling her what was bothering him. I do want you, but I feel like something inside me is trying to get out. When we were kissing just now and you and I were rubbing against each other, I felt something different, an urge I guess you could call it. But I couldn't control it. I wanted to do more, but it scared me. Hinata continued to frown as she rubbed his shoulders. Why were you scared, Naru-kun? You know I wouldn't make fun of you or hurt your feelings, right? She wondered if he worried over similar things that she did, but that didn't fit as she thought about it more. Naruto has no family to be cross with him for losing his virginity to someone, so that can't be it. What couldn't he control? Naruto groaned as he stretched his neck under her attentions then nodded as he closed his eyes. Yeah, I know you won't hurt me. I trust you, believe in you, but I'm afraid I might hurt you, and I don't think I could forgive myself if I did. Hinata's mouth opened then closed quickly as she considered his words, a little shocked at his revelation. Naru-kun, I think you are over-worried. I am sure, from my training, there will be some pain, but I know you will not be trying to hurt me on purpose, and anything that happens accidentally I can forgive easily. I know there will be a lot of things we will have to practice and experiment with, but I am willing to accept anything as long as you are the only one I am doing it with. She blushed deeply as she remembered the initial contact a few minutes earlier then leaned down and kissed his neck causing him to sigh. I know you are worried, but let us try, before we give up. Using the confidence that Neji had given her she continued to narrate to him as the ideas and thoughts began to form in her mind. I am changing Naruto-kun. I am becoming the woman I should have changed into years ago. My body changed, but my mind didn't. If not for you I would still be locked into the shell that my father and other clan members had forced me into. I know you are scared, and I would be lying if I told you I wasn't scared too. But the biggest difference between you and me right now is I am not afraid you will hurt me. I am not afraid of the future with you as your woman, and only your woman, and I am no longer afraid to defy all I have known for you. Naruto nodded then grinned lightly before shrugging. He couldn't believe this was the quiet and shy Hyuga girl from the past and recent times in his life. She had changed, virtually overnight. He could feel it rather than see it. He could feel the confidence radiating off of her and he couldn't help but wonder exactly what did he do or say to help her so much. After a couple of minutes he stopped worrying and squeezed her leg. You're right, it was just a surprise. I have never felt anything that felt that good before. I didn't want to stop, but I knew that if I didn't I might not be able to stop if you asked me to. There. It was in the open. Naruto felt very strongly for Hinata, and while he wanted her in ways he never felt before, he also knew that he didn't want to rape her, and that is what these new feelings felt like to him, and he couldn't live with himself if he actually did brutalize her like that. Hinata blinked as the last sentence took longer for her to process, but then she fully understood what he meant. She had never considered he might be having trouble controlling himself in that manner. In a large way she was touched to the deepest part of her heart. But she also knew that she did not want to deny Naruto any part of her love any further. He was hers, she was his, now it was time to make it official. Hinata nodded as she contemplated the back of his head then kissed it as she finalized her thoughts. Naru-kun, I cannot predict what you do once we are at that point, but I will tell you that I will not back down. This is what I want, and short of you physically abusing me, I will not stop you. Naruto blinked in surprise and his hand stopped moving on her leg. Was she serious? Didn't she hear what he said? Naruto tried to digest what she admitted to, but his brain just couldn't wrap around that declaration she made. Was she saying this instinct in him was okay? Now more than ever, Naruto fervently wished Fana was awake. Hinata kissed him on the back of his neck again, because she could feel the confusion in him, and she wanted it to go away. He didn't deserve to be in such torment, and she wanted to take it from him. Naruto-kun, there may be times I will be my old self, but I am striving to make that not be me anymore. I want every part of me to be yours, and I want you to be secure in the knowledge that I am. She bowed her head for a moment before she draped her arms over his shoulder and rested her head on the back of his. We go on an important mission in the morning, Naru-kun, and there is no telling how long it will take to complete, or even if one or both of us will not come back from it, so we should take this time to enjoy ourselves as much as we can. Unwrapping her legs from around his waist, she stood and took him by the hand. Come on. Naruto blinked at her but stood up and let her lead him back into the house, partially scared, partially excited. The concept of her being his was a bit too much for him to understand, but Hinata was adamant about this, so he went along because his cooperation would, of course, make her happy. Once the door was closed, she led him back into the living room. Hinata turned and smiled at him, then leaned up on tiptoes and kissed him, but before he could return the kiss, she turned around again and was doing something with her hands as Naruto stood and watched her. Not sure what to do, he took off his jacket and hung it on the doorknob of the closet behind him. When he turned back, his jaw dropped. Hinata had taken off her shirt and laid it on the back of the couch. Hinata wrapped her arms around herself and shivered. Naru-kun, I feel cold. Naruto, being the gentleman that she was, sprinted up the stairs and grabbed a towel from the bathroom, then hurried back down to her so she would not be cold any longer. It was his fault she was wet after. He blinked when he got halfway down the stairs and his body completely stopped moving. Hinata was standing next to the couch in just her panties and bra, as she shook out her pants and laid them on the futon as well. Her undergarments were sky blue, with little yellow flowers in random places. She turned to face him after laying her pants across the arm of the couch. She held her arms across her breasts and shivered again. He could see the blush on her face, but he also saw a smile and the determined tilt to her head as she smiled at him. Naruto slowly found the banister under his hand and used it to guide himself as walked the rest of the way to the bottom of the stairs. When he got to the bottom, she stepped towards him, and he wrapped the towel around her. She smiled, then came closer to him and he wrapped his arms around her. Have I told you how beautiful you are? He asked as his mind slowly came back to him. She was the most beautiful woman in the world to him, and nothing would ever change that. She laughed lightly around her shivers. Not since yesterday. He smiled, then kissed her. I'm sorry. You are the most beautiful woman in the world. Hinata blushed lightly, then kissed his Adam's apple. She tucked the edge of the towel in the top near her bra strap, then reached over and blushing, pulled his shirt out of his pants and slowly pulled it up and over his head. Naruto let his arms go up until the shirt came off, then he lowered them to his sides again. Hinata moved in closer and touched his belly near his navel. This is the seal for the Kyuubi. Naruto was a little shocked as she basically admitted to having forbidden knowledge. How long have you known? He stuttered as he watched her face for any adverse reaction. Hinata only smiled at him, love for him radiating from her like waves against the shore. Neji and I stumbled across the information a few months after you left. To be honest, Naruto-kun, it made me love you more. You have always been my protector, ever since we were children. At his blank look she smiled, because she had forgotten also until she got a not so gentle reminder, but she promised she would not forget it again. After a few moments and his questioning look hadn't changed, she giggled, then leaned close to his ear and whispered. Lollipop. Naruto's eyes lit up as the memory returned, but then he blinked in shock. That was you. At her happy smile and eager nod, Naruto wrapped his arms around her and swung her around, which made her laugh harder and lean down and kiss his sweet lips. After a few seconds he put her back on her feet, smile still in place, and shook his head. We didn't even know each other. All I knew was you were hurt, and crying. Naruto dredged his memory and frowned a little before he spoke again. It hurt me to hear you cry. I had heard kids cry before and I've felt bad, but this was different, and I couldn't explain it, I just had to fix it. Hinata looked surprised as well but nodded as she looked into his eyes. And you did. No one had ever been that nice to me before, and we didn't even know each other. Hinata kept her promise to herself. She decided when the time was right, she would tell him. Instead, she reached down and gently touched the center of the seal. Naruto looked down and the seal was visible. He was surprised by this, and that was evident by the look on his face. It had never been visible before unless he called on the fox's chakra. Naruto turned inward and saw the fox still resting in the same position, so this time he tried screaming at him. Hey Fana, what's going on with the seal? I can see it now and I am not using your chakra. What gives? Fana lifted his head slowly and looked at Naruto, then yawned before putting his head back down. Haven't you ever noticed before? Kami, you are dense, aren't you? Naruto fumed but held his temper. Will you just tell me, please? Is it something bad or something about to go wrong? Fana shrugged but did not lift his head again. The seal also appears when you are under extreme duress or if your senses become oversaturated by stimulus. Naruto blinked, then lost his temper. Didn't we already talk about you being too highbrow? Fana raised his head and stared balefully at Naruto. Naruto noticed that Fana's front claws were gleaming in the open and he swallowed hard as he realized that the fox may finally have lost his patience with him. Listen well, whelp. I would call you a half-wit, but it would be an insult to half-wits everywhere. Whenever you get angry enough, excited enough, in this case sexual enough, happy enough, or any number of emotions, the seal will appear. The seal prevented me from escaping before, but now it is more like an amplifier. Now that we are one and your body can use the chakra at will, the seal is just a formality. Although in theory I believe it is the only thing that prevents my consciousness from returning to the divine. Naruto considered that as he watched Hinata slowly reach out and touch the seal around the outside edge, and he sucked in his breath as the seal appeared more clearly. So you are telling me that my belly has become a mood ring then? Fana chuckled before lifting his head and looking at Naruto. Indeed. There are other advantages, but I will not dwell on those. You figure them out on your own, for once. Naruto screamed and raged at Fana, but all that did was make him turn his back to him and begin snoring. Fana had seemed very quiet and uncooperative of late, and it made Naruto wonder what was going on. It seemed to stem from the day he couldn't answer Fana about his feelings for Hinata. I think I might love her, but what is love? Right now it is just a word to me, and until I understand it better I don't want to say it and hurt someone, especially Hina-chan. Fana's ear flicked, then swiveled towards him, but he said nothing else. Usually all Naruto wanted was for the damn fox to shut up, but this was different and it made him feel a little sad, lonely. What are you thinking, Naruto-kun? You seem far away. Naruto blinked, then looked at Hinata as she knelt at his feet, a hand on either side of his waist. She looked at him with curiosity and a little concern in her eyes. His hand went automatically to the back of his head and he grinned with a slight blush. Well, I was thinking about what you were doing and wondering what had changed about you. You were always so shy and confused around me, you don't seem so shy anymore. What did I do or say that helped you so much? Hinata smiled with the slight hint of a blush as she leaned forward and kissed his belly, making his skin jump and the seal become very bright. Well, I thought about it today and I came to a decision. It was not an easy one because I have never thought like this before, but I am more confident now than I was ever before. And it is all thanks to you. Naruto blinked as he looked at her. Me? You said that before. Just what did I do? Hinata laughed as she stood up and took his hand again and led him up the stairs. You made me realize what is important to me. You have filled me with confidence, something that no one else had ever given me. You gave me pride because I am very proud to be your girlfriend. You have comforted me when I was sad, and encouraged me when everything seemed hopeless. For that reason alone, I want you to know how much I appreciate and love you. Naruto got a little nervous as she led him past the bedroom and into the bathroom. She turned and reached for his belt, unbuckling it. Before she got any further, he grabbed her hands and held them. Hinata looked up at him and smiled. Trust me, Naru-kun. Naruto hesitated, then nodded, slowly letting go of her hands. Naruto watched and felt as if he were dreaming as she finished unbuttoning his pants, then slid them off his hips and down his legs to the floor. Hinata slowly stood up, running her hands along his body, then stopped at his chest and traced his areolas with the tip of each index finger, making him gasp as her touch sent slivers of ice running along his nerve endings. Where did you learn to do this? Hinata giggled a little, then shrugged. I went and talked to Tenten before I came over here. I would have been here sooner, but we had lunch and she told me a few tricks that she has used on Neji that were very effective. Actually, Naruto was glad she didn't get there earlier. He had an errand to run, also one that would make both of them very happy. Just as fast as he thought that, her words hit Naruto and he jerked as if she slapped him and his eyes bugged out. Nani? Tenten? Neji? I had no idea that they were an item. Neji told me he went to see her but I didn't think. Hinata laughed before leaning forward and licking at his right, bringing a moan from him, which made her grin before she bit it lightly. Yeah, I knew they were talking but I was not sure how serious they were until Neji told me. Naruto almost lost his balance as his eyes got bigger. What? Neji told you? Hinata laughed then stood straighter and kissed him on the neck. Yes, but only because I was confused and wanted his advice. Naruto almost wanted to run screaming from the room, but Hinata's lips on his neck was starting to feel really good and that made him want to stay more than to run. Naruto looked down at her and saw her breasts clearly over the top of her bra and he was drawn to them like a moth to a flame. Somehow he knew this flame would burn, but he wasn't worried about the damage. Naruto reached up very slowly and Hinata looked down and watched as he pulled the towel loose and dropped it to the floor. When his hands touched her bare skin she started breathing a little harder. Her eyes were riveted to his hands and she shivered a little just before he cupped her breast, and a moan came out of her parted lips as her back arched involuntarily, pushing more of her into his hand. Naruto grinned as Hinata's eyes closed halfway and she moved closer to the man she loved while he squeezed and caressed her through the material of her bra. Naruto watched enrapt as Hinata's hand slid down his body then grasped him through his boxers. Naruto groaned loudly and his hips thrust forward as she held him and his hand tightened on her and she in turn gripped him more tightly, the two of them creating an erotic cycle. It was a standoff so Naruto tried to break the tie by leaning forward and biting Hinata on her neck right below her left jaw line and licking intently. He was a little clumsy at first, never doing this before, but her moans encouraged him to keep going and he became more excited as he was feeling her pulse pound in her neck. He got even more excited as she moaned and began to stroke him, making him throw back his head and moan before moving in her neck until she actually pushed his head back and pulled away from him. I'm sorry Naru-kun, you were starting to hurt me. Naruto nodded then took a deep shuddering breath as she continued to caress him. Hinata grinned mischievously before leaning in and kissing his lips. I'm still a little cold Naru-kun, maybe we should take a shower. Naruto grinned as he thought about what that would be like then nodded. Okay, sounds like it would be fun. Dangerous, but definitely fun. Hinata guided him into the bathtub and giggled as she reached down turning on the water. Naruto closed the shower curtain as Hinata was adjusting the water temperature until it was warm. She pulled the latch that would make the water come out of the shower head and they both screamed as they were pelted immediately with cold water before it adjusted. The water out of the shower was actually colder than the water in the pool and they both got goosebumps and shivered until the water warmed, but neither really cared. They looked at each other and giggled before kissing under the spray of warm water. Naruto reached up and rubbed her shoulders then pulled back and looked at her with a new gleam in his eyes. He reached up and slowly lowered her left bra strap from her shoulder and kissed where the strap was. Hinata watched him and sighed as his lips left a burning sensation across her skin wherever they touched. Naruto kept kissing her, becoming more insistent and excited but his eyes kept roving over her chest. He couldn't see any zippers or buttons, how did the damn thing come off? Kissing around her collarbone he saw a gap in the front of her bra and he grinned. He stood back a little and reached up to grasp either side of the bra. May I? Hinata blushed a little then nodded. So many firsts in one day, she was amazed she hadn't fainted yet, but she guessed what she said was true. Naruto made everything better for her, now she would make it better for him. Her breathing quickened as she watched his fingers flex, but he seemed to stop just as she thought he was about to open it. Naruto pulled, but the bra resisted. He twisted making Hinata grimace as the bra got too tight, but still it resisted. He stopped and looked at it then tried to move one side up and the other side down, much like Fana it seemed the damn thing was laughing at him. Naruto growled and was about to start biting it when Hinata giggled then reached up and took his hands and showed him how to manipulate it. Push the two ends towards each other, then a slight diagonal twist. When the clasp was undone Naruto smiled then laughed at himself. That was easier than he thought. Good thing he didn't have to wear one of these things. Hinata moved her arm out of the bra strap as he moved it, and then the other arm and Naruto tossed her bra over the curtain rod and it landed onto the basin for the sink. For the first time he saw her without a bulky jacket, without her ninja outfit, and without a bra, and he was entranced. He felt a great pressure in his loins as he looked upon her and blushed. Her breasts were perfect, the left one seemed a little bit rounder than the right one, but he didn't care as his hands reached up and cupped them and she moaned in approval. If there were a book on breasts, hers would be pictured in the top 5, hell she would be number 1. Her were impressive also as he traced her areola with his thumbs. They stood erect and were almost an inch long from the areola, which was a darker brown and almost a perfect gold coin shape. She looked at him shyly, as her arms crossed under her breasts, making them come together, forming a beautiful valley between them. Naruto growled lightly, then moved in and kissed her mounds, paying special attention to her, trying to imitate what she had done to him earlier. He reached around and was holding the small of her back as she sighed and moaned, and her arms came up to hold his head to her breasts. She didn't want him to stop. She couldn't believe how incredible he made her feel. She could remember washing herself, but it never felt this good. As he continued to lavish attention on her mammary, she reached back and took his hands and moved them down to her backside, and he squeezed and touched it through her panties happily. He had to admit, as perfect as her breasts were, he loved her backside best. It was round, lush, and toned beautifully. His Hinata was better than anything on this planet. Well, he still loved ramen, but she was neck and neck with it. He looked up at her from his bent-over position and she smiled down at him, a slight flush on her cheeks. She felt a slight tremor of embarrassment, and she blushed ever so lightly now, but she was no longer ashamed of what they would do. It wasn't lust or carnal pleasure, this was love, and she truly loved her Naruto-kun. After a few minutes of just fondling her, Naruto slid a hand into the back of her panties and she moaned as she ran her fingers through his hair. Slowly he inched her panties down until the doorbell rang. Naruto looked up at Hinata and grinned. "Please tell me that came from you." Hinata laughed and shook her head. "Afraid not. Maybe you should go see who it is." Naruto thought about it as the bell rang again, then shook his head no and started kissing her again. Hinata smiled then moaned as his lips made contact with her belly and he began to kiss around her navel, which was an innie, and his tongue tickled her a little as he delved into the opening. With a giggle she rubbed his head as he smiled up at her. Hinata didn't know what it would feel like if he went any lower, but if it felt better than her hand then she was all for it. While a nice feeling, Naruto-kun, that's the wrong spot. Naruto grinned as he looked at her slit. It was a light pink between the lips which peeked out at him. He wasn't sure what to do at this point, but he knew he wanted to hear her moan some more. Naruto moved forward to kiss her, and Hinata clenched up in anticipation, as his lips got closer and closer, until they heard someone calling from downstairs. "Naruto! Where are you, dirtbag?" Naruto blinked and looked up at Hinata. She looked just as confused as he was. That sounded like Kiba. Naruto's face changed as he went from passionate to angry. What the is he doing coming into the house? Hinata grasped his arm as he turned to get out of the shower. "Naruto-kun, please remain calm. I am upset too, but we can handle this calmly." He turned and looked her. Eyes of the predator looked at her, but she poured all of the love she felt for him in her look, silently pleading with him. It worked in Tsunade's office, and it worked here also. Naruto took a deep breath then slowly nodded. Leaning forward he gave her a quick kiss before leaving the bathroom, going into his bedroom and pulling off his boxers and pulling on a pair of sweatpants. Running both sets of fingers through his hair he turned and walked out into the hallway and got halfway down the stairs when a pungent aroma assaulted his nose. "Good boy Akamaru. Do it on the beanbags now." The dog barked then trotted over to the beanbag chair and hopped up on it and was about to deposit a steaming pile upon it as well when Naruto, whisker marks very prominent now, and seal blazing bright red walked down the stairs. "Well Kiba, and Akamaru. What a surprise to see you, in my house, and uninvited. And I see you are as irresponsible as ever, letting your dog crap on my furniture." Kiba smiled as he shrugged. "What can I say, dumbass? My dog has good taste when it comes to furniture. He obviously knows what to do around." And here Kiba looked around and gestured with his hands. "Shit." The dog barked as he finished soiling the first beanbag and hopped off to go to the next one. The dog wagged his tail happily, not a care in the world as he was sure he would get a treat from Naruto for doing this, so his master had told him. Naruto grinned, as his eyes became completely red and the pupils became slitted. His fangs elongated, and his fingernails grew into claws as he gripped the railing. "I warn you Kiba, if your dog does not display better manners I'll teach them to him myself, and I guarantee it's not something you or he will forget for a while." Hiba turned to say something to Naruto but froze as he watched Naruto grin at him and his canines finished stretching while he watched them. That's enough, Akamaru. I think we made our point. Akamaru looked questioningly at his master, then turned and trotted over to him and sat at his feet. Naruto growled, feeling nothing but fury for the two intruders as he stepped down to the kitchen entry. And what point would that be, Kiba? That you can be an ass. That you haven't grown up since grammar school. Or that your mother should have beaten you with a newspaper more often. Kiba got red-faced, but was a bit baffled. He had never told anyone about that, so how did Naruto know? Kiba shook his head and focused on what he had said before. Reason. You want a reason. How about coming back here and taking something that doesn't belong to you? Naruto frowned as he looked at the dog boy. He almost felt sorry for him. Almost. She was never yours, Kiba. She is a person and she made a decision, and from what I got from her, it was a decision she made years before the two of you ever met. My suggestion to you would be to get over it. There's tons of women out there, some that may even not mind your stink, or have no sense of smell. If that doesn't work and you do eventually find someone, call me, so I can hit her with her white cane. Fana crowed in his mind as he sat up and his tails waved back and forth in amusement. That was one thing Naruto liked about the fox, he appreciated a good cut down, and even Naruto had to admit, that was pretty good. Kiba growled as he stared up at Naruto, and while Naruto was tempted to dive down and kick the crap out of him, he told Hinata he would be calm. With a wave of his hand, Naruto turned to go into the kitchen. I'll get you some paper towels and deodorizer. Kiba blinked and looked at Naruto incredulously. For what? Naruto stopped at the doorway and blinked as if confused. Well, you surely don't want to use your hands to clean that up, do you? Kiba frowned and he looked at Akamaru, and Akamaru looked at him and they both seemed to shrug. Akamaru didn't understand what was going on, but his master said it would all be okay, so he waited patiently while his master talked. It's your house, you clean it. Kiba said as he crossed his arms across his chest. Naruto grinned at him and held up his left hand while still staring down at them, and Hinata took the offered hand and came down the stairs raking the fingers of her other hand through her hair. When she reached the landing that Naruto stood on, she retied the purple robe clothes that she had brought from her house. Oh, I think you should clean it up, Kiba. After all, it is from your dog, and he wouldn't have done that if you hadn't come into our house uninvited. I believe that it is still against the law to do that. She said rather sweetly, but in her voice was the underlying tone of anger and her eyes flashed as she looked at Kiba. Naruto smiled proudly at Hinata, who came over and kissed him, and he put his arm around her shoulder and she hugged his waist. Kiba's face turned crimson and he gritted his teeth. So what? You gonna tell on me? Hinata shook her head sadly as she literally looked down on him now, not just figuratively. If you give me no other choice, then I would have to do it. Hinata frowned as she looked at him. Besides which, if I were going to do that, I would have done it when you put your foul hands on me. Remember that day, Kiba? I haven't forgotten it, I can assure you. Her tone was quiet, but there was an angry, painful undertone to it. It spoke of trust betrayed and a friendship broken. Kiba hung his head for a moment then nodded. Yeah, I remember. I made a big mistake that day. Hinata shook her head and for the first time her eyes held pity for him. No, Kiba, you made the mistake when you thought you could have me just because. I chose Naruto-kun because he has never judged me, but you would judge me all the time. He has always supported and stood by me, while you only supported me when Kurenai-sensei was around, and the reason I will always love him. She turned and smiled at Naruto then. He has never betrayed my trust or tried to take advantage of me. I am sure I could think of the most horrifying torture or the most painful death imaginable, and Naruto-kun would rather suffer 10 times worse than to do that to me. Naruto grinned as the effects of the fox faded more and more until he was looking at her through his eyes again. 1,000,000 times worse, Haim. Hinata smiled a genuinely warm smile to him before she looked at Kiba again. Kiba, I understand that it hurt your feelings when I rejected you, but that is no reason for you to act like this. Naruto is not the cause of my rejection, I never liked you that way. Please accept it and move on, before someone gets hurt more than emotionally. Naruto is a good man and he takes good care of me. If you still have any honor left, that should be all that matters to you. Kiba blinked then nodded as he turned away, hiding his face from them. Naruto went into the kitchen and grabbed some paper towels and a spray bottle of deodorizer and brought it out to Kiba. Naruto frowned as he looked at Kiba's face, and realized nothing would change. He wasn't hurt or crying as he first thought. In fact, he had a look of calculation on his face, but he showed no remorse, no sorrow. Hinata was just a prize to him, and Naruto vowed it was one prize he would never claim. He held out the cleaning supplies and Kiba took it with a muffled, "Thanks," and cleaned up the mess that Akamaru had made. Kiba handed the deodorizer back to Naruto and stuffed the soiled paper towels in his coat pocket, but before he could go, Naruto put a hand on his shoulder. One last attempt at rational to an irrational mind. If it is any consolation, Kiba, I do care about Hinata a great deal, and I did not plan this, it just happened. Kiba shrugged Naruto's hand off, then slowly walked to the door and whistled for Akamaru. At the threshold, as Akamaru passed him, he turned and looked up at Hinata. He's a loser. He'll never be as good as me. One day you'll understand that. Kiba turned and walked out the door, closing it behind him. Naruto frowned, then turned his head and looked at her as Hinata came up behind him and laid her cheek against his back. I guess he has it bad for you. I really don't want to fight Kiba. The Leaf Village needs all of its ninja to be in top performance. Hinata nodded and lightly kissed his back. I think he will stop now. If you told him anything about it, he would have just gotten angrier. Maybe hearing it from me will get him to stop behaving this way. Naruto sighed, then turned all the way and hugged Hinata and kissed her on her lips before leaning back and looking in her eyes. Our house, little Hina-chan. Hinata blushed, then giggled. Well, I thought if he heard me say that he would back off. Naruto nodded as he traced every inch of her face with his eyes, then turned and went to his jacket and fished out a little box and handed it to her. I would have liked to have given this to you on a happier day, and it's a bit wet from my dip in the pool, but it will still work. Naruto walked up the stairs and into the kitchen as Hinata pulled off the ribbon and looked inside the box. A single gold key stared back at her and she blinked in surprise as she took it out of the box, and it trembled slightly in her hand, mimicking her knees as she slowly followed her man into the kitchen. I'm going to eat some shrimp yakisoba. Would you like some, Hina-chan, or would you prefer miso ramen? Hinata held up the key and Naruto chuckled as he set the instant meals down. Oh, that. Well, it can't be your house too if you always have to wait for me to open the door, can it? Hinata had been bringing her clothes and knickknacks over since they started dating, and she was sleeping here with him. There was no point in not giving her a key. Besides, he liked the idea of her always being with him. Hinata placed the key carefully on the counter, then patted it affectionately before she jumped over the counter and tackled Naruto, kissing him everywhere at once. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you, I love you, I love you. Naruto tried to return the kisses, but she moved so much he finally had to grab her face to hold her still and then kiss her mouth, which she did eagerly and for what felt like a long, blissful time. In fact, Naruto didn't even feel his sweatpants being maneuvered down his hips until they were well below his thighs. Hinata sat up and opened her robe, and he gasped as he felt a wet sensation on his body and an intense feeling similar to the earlier part of the day when they were in the living room. Hinata began to move along his shaft, sliding up, then down again teasingly, and she moaned loudly as the doorbell rang again. Ooh! Hinata groaned in frustration and struck the floor with both hands. Naruto reached up and grabbed her hips and stared into her eyes. Ignore it, Haim. They'll go away. Hinata giggled, then nodded as she slid along him again, and her breath caught as he was poised at the portal of life when they heard the door open. Perhaps you should learn to lock it if you are going to ever mate together. Naruto growled in frustration as Hinata scrambled to get off of him and fix her robe. Fana only shook his head but said nothing else. Naruto almost got his sweatpants up, almost. Ino and Sakura walked into the kitchen and both were chattering away at each other when they saw Naruto bobbing in the air with his sweatpants not quite up high enough to cover him. Sakura blinked and Ino's mouth hung open just before Hinata jumped in front of him. Sakura turned beet red and began screaming at him. Naruto, you pervert. What the hell are you doing with your dork out? I didn't need to see that. Do you know that will scar me for the rest of my life? Ino finally smiled as she leaned on the counter and wiggled her eyebrows at him. Well, he is a lot bigger than I expected. As if that wasn't enough, Sakura continued her tirade as Hinata glanced back to see if he was covered yet. Don't defend him, Hinata. Make him cover his hot dog. Ino chuckled as she tried to peek around Hinata, then settled for fanning herself. Hot dog. That bad boy is a full-course meal and a bag of chips. Sakura turned on Ino and continued her tirade. Gag me with a spoon, Ino pig. Ino blushed but couldn't stop herself once she got on a roll. Gag me with that. Sakura couldn't decide between extreme anger or extreme embarrassment. She settled somewhere in the middle. Ino, don't be a. What would Shikamaru say if he heard you talking like that? Hinata sighed and in her best imitation of Shikamaru said, what a drag. Ino, not to be outdone, grinned at Hinata. So is that a baseball bat in his pants, or is he just happy to see us? Naruto, with a sigh, fixed his sweatpants, then took out a kettle and put water on the stove for his yakisoba. Sakura was still shouting towards him and Ino, alternating between the both of them while Hinata was trying to get her to calm down without getting angry herself. Naruto at this point was beyond caring. Slowly he walked over and sat on a stool in front of the counter and put his head in his hands as he tuned it all out. Maybe a guard dog, he thought as he watched to see if the watched pot would boil or not. No, they'd probably feed it better than I would. Fana just cackled.